Good afternoon. We're going to call to order this meeting. This is a meeting of the Housing Policy and Development Committee. It's our regularly scheduled meeting. I'm chair of the committee, Councilmember Cam Gordon. I'm joined today by Council Members Goodman, Bender, Ellison, Schrader, and Reich. We definitely make up a quorum of the committee so we can conduct our business. We have, let me double check. We have 7 matters before us today. 2 of them are consent items, and 5 of them are public hearings. 4 of the public hearings I expect to be done quickly. So we're going to save the longer public hearing on the renter protections for the last of our public hearings, and hopefully we can move through the rest of our agenda rather quickly. I'm going to move the consent items first. First consent item is issuance of bonds for the Parkview Apartments at 1125 Fremont Avenue North and some neighboring addresses. And the second consent item is a resolution granting approval of Hennepin County Housing and Redevelopment Authority to undertake a housing project on behalf of Homes Housing Partners through an issuance of a multifamily housing revenue bond of $10 million. Oops, excuse me, $10 million. Does anybody want to discuss the consent items at all? So then I will move those. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Those items are approved. Now I'll move on to the first public hearing, which is the land sale at 1621 Fremont Avenue South. I'm sorry, Fremont Avenue North. I better get that right. So, Mr. Ramadan, maybe you can give us a brief presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon and members of the committee. Yes, 1621 Fremont Avenue North. We're looking at the sale through Minneapolis Homes. Policies for the program were established by the City Council on December 11, 2015 and February 10, 2017. Staff recommends the sale of 1621 Fremont Avenue North to Visitation Monastery of Minneapolis for its appraised value of $12,600, subject to conditions. 1621 Fremont was acquired on October 13, 1995 from Hennepin County as tax-forfeited land for $5,400. The staff has continuously marketed this property to now a list of over 2,800 people, and this was the only application we received for this property. The purchasers intend to invest approximately $700,000 to build a new 400,000 square foot single-story residence featuring 8 bedrooms and 8 baths with an attached 3-car garage to live in as the owner occupants. CPET's construction management staff has reviewed this and found it sufficient to meet the minimum new construction standards of the program. Notification was provided to the Northside Residence Redevelopment Council on July 8, 2019. The Northside Residence Redevelopment Council board voted unanimously to support the Visitation Monastery of Minneapolis on July 15, 2019. Sister Karen, Sister Brenda, and Sister Suzanne are here today. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much for that report. Because this is land sale, we're required to have a public hearing. So we'll open the public hearing, and you may speak if you would like.
Thank you. My name is Sister Karen Mohan. I'm in Councilman Ellison's district, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you for reviewing our application. We have been in the neighborhood in North Minneapolis for 30 years with the Ministry of Prayer and Presence and Hospitality. We are committed to the people, young and old, whom we serve. We are told that our presence helps to make a more peaceful neighborhood, and we hope that that continues. After living in our beautiful home at the corner of 16th and Fremont, 10 years later, we purchased a second home at 1619 Girard. Now we have different needs. Our community is a little older and a little more infirm. We need some housing that will help us at this time in our history while remaining in the neighborhood. Building on the 2 properties, the city property 1621 and the 1619 property would allow for a more accessible space where we can meet the needs of all of our sisters, elder and young. We know that there's a national trend for elders to remain in their own homes, and we want to join that trend. So we want to build in such a way that this new residence will blend in with other homes on the block and could also eventually be used for multifamily dwellings in the future when our physical and other needs are no longer needed there. We will then sell our 2 current residences, and in a spirit of good stewardship, we will give back to the neighborhood the 2 homes that we have lovingly cared for these 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this issue of the land sale? Seeing none, then I'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Ellison, would you like to move this item?
Yes, and want to thank them for building on this property. And I'm only 29, and so I've never known the neighborhood without your presence in it. So I want to thank you all for the work that you do, and I'm happy to move approval of this item.
All right, then, seeing no further discussion on that motion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries. Thank you so much. And Mr. Ramadan, the next land sale at 2120 Aldrich Avenue North.
2120 Aldrich Avenue North, again, was a sale through the Minneapolis Homes Policies and Programs established by the City Council on December 11, 2015, and on February 10, 2017. The staff recommends the sale of this property to Sadiq Muhammad and Safra Abdurrahman for an appraised value of $7,900 subject to conditions. The staff also recommends the approval of an award of up to $20,000 home buyer incentive funds to Sadiq and Safra. 2120 Aldrich was acquired from Hennepin County on February 8, 2013 from Hennepin as tax-forfeited land for $2,600 in the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. The staff has continuously marketed this property to now over 2,800 people. And again, this was the only application received for this property. The purchaser intends to invest $261,973 to be the owner-occupant of a new duplex home with approximately 4 bedrooms and 2 baths in the main residence and a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment on the lower level. Again, we reviewed the construction and found it to meet the minimum new construction standards. In this case, notification was provided to the Hawthorne Neighborhood Council on April 23, 2019, and the Hawthorne Board again voted its approval on May 20, 2019. Unfortunately, the home buyers, Sadiq Mahmoud and Sahra Abdurrahman, were unable to be here today as they're traveling out of the country. So are there any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you so much for the report. I'll still open the public hearing in case there's anyone here who wants to speak on this item. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Seeing no one step forward, then I'll close the public hearing, and I will move approval of this land sale. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, then all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. And now we're on to our third land sale. This is 2946 Queen Avenue North. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Kevin Canase. I'm a senior project coordinator with CPED. I come before you with 2 land sales, 2946 Queen Avenue North and 2950 Queen Avenue North to Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation for $5,100 each. These 2 lots are replacement lots for 2 previous land sales at 2659 Queen Avenue North and 2915 Sheridan Avenue North, which were previously approved for sale by City Council on February 15, 2019, through the Minneapolis Homes Development Assistance Program, Round 3. The reason for the replacement is that these 2 lots that were previously approved have significant soil remediation costs that make the proposed developments unfeasible. The city does have a soil correction allowance as part of our contract with Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation, but the cost of soil remediation exceeds that amount. The purchaser has secured construction financing, met program requirements for the Development Assistance Program, and is prepared to complete due diligence in order to acquire the properties and begin construction. Notification was provided to the neighborhood, that's Jordan Neighborhood Association, on June 8th, 2019. Or, excuse me, June 28th, 2019. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I have a question, Councilmember Ellison.
I got some answers a couple of days ago when we were discussing this item, but I just wanted to clarify, when you say what was the need for the soil remediation? Was it because of is a toxic site or the soils were infirm? Neighbors get kind of nervous when they hear that kind of language, so I wanted to clarify for the public. Yeah.
Chair Gordon, Councilmember Ellison, the need for soil remediation was due to unsuitable soils, such as soils that were not compact or dense enough in order to support the foundation of a home. So in order to do that, the cost to remove that soil, replace it, compact it, and prepare it for a future foundation exceeded the cost that would make the development feasible.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll open the public hearing on this matter then. This is for the land sale of the 2 properties on Queen Avenue North. Is there anybody here to speak to this? Seeing nobody here, then I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from committee members? Seeing none, then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, well, I'll move this forward. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. All right, that motion carries. Next up, we have our 2018 U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. Capers, and I believe we'll have a brief report on this matter, and we can also see if anyone's here for that public hearing. Welcome, Mr. Bauer.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm Matt Bauer with the Intergovernmental Relations Department, and this is a public hearing for the city's 2018 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report to the federal government, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it covers how we spent in the program year 2018 our HUD entitlement funds in the areas of the Community Development Block Grant, Emergency Solutions Grant, Home Investment Partnerships, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. We're required before submitting the report tomorrow to hold a public hearing to receive any comment on the report, and staff requests that any direction be given to include any comments provided at the hearing or at the comment period to be included in that report to HUD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any committee members have any questions, Mr. Bauer? Seeing none, then I will open this public hearing and see if anybody is here to make comment on our Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. Not seeing anybody step forward. Last call. Then I'll close the public hearing, and I will move this forward and direct staff to include any comments received here and also otherwise submitted in our 2018 report to be submitted to HUD on August 29, 2019. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. Thank you very much. And that will bring us to the last item on our agenda, which is the Renter Protection Ordinance. And we'll have a presentation. I know that we have committee members who do have appointments around 4 or so, so everybody can keep in mind we've got a target of wrapping things up maybe before that so they can get to their 4 o'clock, but we'll see how that goes. But welcome, Ms. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrea Brennan. I am the Director of Housing Policy and Development for the city. I'm going to be talking about the policy guidance, give some information about renters in Minneapolis, talk about how the proposed ordinance fits into the broader city housing strategy, highlight some of the findings that we use to develop the policy, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kim Keller, Director of Regulatory Services, to talk more specifically about the ordinance components, enforcement, and implementation. There are a number of guiding policy documents that have been adopted by the City Council that establishes the goal of creating renter protections in the city. Minneapolis 2040 calls for eliminating disparities based on race, ethnicity, gender, country of origin, religion, or zip code, and expanding affordable and accessible housing for all Minneapolis residents. Minneapolis 2040 identifies policies and action steps to protect tenant rights and equitably promote the ability of tenants to secure and maintain stable housing. Earlier this summer, the City Council adopted the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan. This plan identifies housing as a key area with a goal of reducing involuntary displacement in rental housing for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. In February of this year, the council adopted the Renter First housing policy, which prioritizes the dignity, stability, health, and safety of renters in regulatory and enforcement decision-making. This policy guidance is also reflected in the city's unified housing policy, which recognizes the importance of tenant supports, including reducing evictions, supporting renters' rights to habitable homes, and expanding tenant protections. Renter households now make up the majority of households in Minneapolis, growing by nearly 14,000 households between 2000 and 2017, which is approximately a 17% increase. Renters in Minneapolis are more likely to be low income than homeowners, and households of color are more likely to rent than white households. This chart shows owner-renter status by racial groups. Green shows the percentage of households in each racial group that are renter households. Blue shows the percentage of households that own their home. The only racial group where the majority of households, approximately 57%, own their homes is white non-Hispanic. 81% of Black and African American households, 77% of Native American households, 65% of Asian households, and 73% of Hispanic Latinx households rent their home. More than half of renters have incomes less than 60% of the area median income. That's about 50,000 renter households in the city. For renters, housing costs have increased much faster than incomes. Since 2000, housing costs for renters have increased by 17%, while the income of renters has increased by only 4%. The vacancy rate in Minneapolis has remained below 5% since 2015 and is lower for apartment units under $1,000 in monthly rent. 3 out of 4 low-income households earning less than 50% of the area median income in Minneapolis are housing cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for rent. Supporting renters and renter protections are just one part of the city's overall housing strategy. This strategy includes increasing housing supply, including new affordable housing production, preserving existing affordable housing, both subsidized and unsubsidized, increasing affordable homeownership opportunities, particularly for people of color, and ending and preventing homelessness. This proposed ordinance is an important part of the overall housing strategy to help expand access to housing for renters. The city is supporting renters in many other ways. In 2018, the city adopted an advance notice of sale ordinance providing 90 days of post-sale protections for tenants when a building is sold. In 2019, the city significantly increased funding for renter supports, including free legal services to represent renters in habitability and evictions cases in housing court, expanding tenant remedies actions and funding for a revolving rental repair fund, and supporting families with school-age kids to secure or stabilize housing by providing rent assistance and supportive services. The goal of the Renter Protections Ordinance is to expand access to housing for low-income renters and renters with barriers related to criminal evictions and credit history. To address these policy goals, the ordinance sets a security deposit cap and limits what can be considered in tenant screening criteria. The next few slides will highlight some of the key findings that support the ordinance focus on criminal history, evictions, and credit score. The ordinances limit what can be considered in terms of criminal history. According to BJS statistics, up to 100 million Americans have arrest records on file, and nearly half of U.S. children have at least one parent with a record. We know that across the country and in Minnesota, people of color are more likely to be imprisoned than white households. By year-end 2017, the imprisonment rate for sentenced Black males was almost 6 times that of sentenced white males, and the rate for Black females was almost double that for white females. In Minnesota, African Americans make up 34% of the Minnesota prison population, while comprising only 6.5% of the population as a whole. We examined a number of academic studies to learn more about the criminal history and the likelihood of recidivism, as well as its impact on housing. Studies on recidivism demonstrate the risk of a new offense by someone who has committed an offense in the past declines significantly over time. Sociological research suggests that criminal history does not provide reliable information about the potential for housing success. Research shows that stable housing reduces the incidence of future criminal activity. These studies are included with the RCA for your reference. The ordinance limits the period of time that an eviction may be considered when screening applicants for housing. Evictions disproportionately affect two zip codes in Minneapolis, 55411 and 55412, where many low-income residents and residents of color reside. Nearly half of renter households in these zip codes experienced an eviction filing in the 3 years prior to the city's eviction study that was done in 2016. Legal Aid and Volunteer Lawyers Network have shared that for households with an eviction on record, it becomes harder to secure safe, stable housing. An eviction remains on a tenant's record for 7 years and can be found in court records indefinitely. Research released earlier this year by Dr. Brittany Lewis of Cura further documents the challenges that evictions causes, particularly for women of color. This report is included as part of the record. Eviction filings, not just eviction judgments, can appear on tenant screening reports, limiting housing options for tenants who have them on their record. The city is doing much more to address evictions beyond what's in the ordinance, including providing funding for eviction legal representation and working more upstream with county, nonprofit, and other partners. The ordinance addresses the use of credit scores in tenant screening. Credit scores by themselves typically are not based on rental payment history and do not necessarily predict the likelihood of paying rent on a regular and timely basis. Low-income consumers are less likely to access the types of financial services that report to the traditional credit bureaus, which can lead to lower credit scores. Numerous studies document that households of color are likely to have lower credit scores than their white counterparts. Therefore, we believe that credit score is not a fair indicator of success in housing. Additionally, about 64 million people in the United States have no credit history or lack sufficient credit history to generate a credit score with the major credit bureaus. Low-income consumers are less likely to access the types of financial services that report to the traditional credit bureaus, which can lead to lower credit scores. 1 in 5 consumers have errors on at least one of their 3 credit reports. The subject matter for this ordinance was first introduced in March 2018. The council offices held meetings throughout the course of 2018 to develop the policy ideas that are represented in this ordinance. An initial draft was released earlier this summer, and the city received a significant amount of input that informed the current form of the ordinance. This list up here represents a number of the stakeholders we reached out to or had ongoing conversations with about the ordinance. These organizations shared a wide range of opinions, many in support, some in strong opposition, about the ordinance and the process. We also received several specific recommendations. We listened to all of these viewpoints. Some feedback was included, but there was also stakeholder feedback that was not included. All of it is part of the public record. So at this point, we can, like my colleague Kim Keller, to come up and talk about the ordinance specifics.
Welcome.
Thank you. Council members, Kim Keller, Director of Regulatory Services. I'm going to outline the specifics of the ordinances and then talk through enforcement and implementation. So starting with the security deposit ordinance. With policy goal of reducing upfront costs for renters, this ordinance seeks to limit security deposits. They will be limited to 1 month's rent. If the lease or other contract stipulates upfront rent above and beyond the first month's rent, then the security deposit is capped at a half-month rent and must be allowed to be paid in up to 3 installments. I know that that's a lot of jargon in there, so put an example in. For example, if rent was $1,000 a month, the security deposit would also be capped at $1,000, and the upfront cost would be $2,000. If instead a property owner opted to also charge last month's rent upfront, then the total cost for the renter would be $2,500. The security deposit would be $500 of that and could be paid in those installments. There is an exception included in the ordinance for units that receive a referral between a landlord and a nonprofit service provider or government agency. The security deposit can be 1.5 months' rent. The reason for including this exception was that there may be residents who have barriers that still make it difficult to obtain housing, even with the changes provided in the ordinance. These residents working with a nonprofit or government provider could be asked to pay this extra rent in order to, this extra security deposit amount in order to help overcome some of these perceived barriers. Moving on to the renter screening ordinance. The goal of this applicant screening ordinance is to increase access to housing. Landlords have two tracks that they can use in renter screening. The first option for them is to adopt the inclusive screening criteria that I will outline, which includes limits on criminal, rental, and credit history. The other option that they have is to conduct an individualized assessment that the property owner or management company would develop. Looking at the inclusive screening criteria around criminal history, the ordinance provides for specific guidance based on recidivism research and practices of other jurisdictions. Misdemeanors with sentencing dates older than 3 years may not be included in screening. Neither can felonies with sentencing dates older than 7 years, except in the cases of first-degree arson, first-degree assault, or aggravated robbery, which have look-back periods of 10 years. The longest look-back period was included in the ordinance based on feedback from stakeholders and a review of Minnesota sentencing guidelines. In particular, stakeholders expressed a need to include certain violent crimes against persons or property where the sentence could be longer than the 7-year look-back. In addition to these look-back periods, a property owner may not consider the following as relates to criminal history: an arrest in an inactive case that did not resolve in a conviction, participation in or completion of a diversion or deferral of a judgment program, any conviction that's been vacated or expunged, any conviction for crime that's no longer illegal in Minnesota, or a conviction or other determination in the juvenile justice system. Property owners are allowed to screen for someone who's required to have a lifetime registry on the predatory offender list and for someone who's convicted of manufacturing or distributing a controlled substance. And these provisions are in line with the requirements of under federal guidelines for subsidized housing. Moving to the renter screening portion of the inclusive screening criteria. The history that must be excluded from the screening are evictions where the judgment is 3 or more years old, an eviction settlement 1 or more years old, evictions that were dismissed or had a judgment in the applicant's favor. Insufficient rental history cannot be used as screening criteria. And finally, if a landlord requires an income of 3 times the rent as a screening standard, they must make an exception if the tenant can demonstrate an ability to pay that rent with lower income. Moving to credit history, lastly, while including credit history in screening criteria remains allowable, this ordinance prohibits the use of a credit score or an insufficient credit history when screening applicants. As I referenced earlier, landlords may decide to use an individualized assessment in place of the inclusive screening criteria. If they do so, they must accept and review supplemental material that's provided by the applicant. With both the inclusive screening criteria and the individualized assessment, denials of applicants must include a notification along with the basis for denial. And those using an individualized assessment must also detail what supplemental evidence was considered and the reason why that evidence was not enough to override the denial. Enforcement of these ordinances is set to follow our established procedures and due process. Complaints can be filed via 311, an inspector, or working with a nonprofit renter organization. Regulatory Services tenant navigators and the city attorney's office will work together to investigate the complaints. Enforcement paths for founded complaints can range from a warning to citations, conditions on the rental license, and potential revocation. Any citation or adverse action on the license is appealable through our administrative hearings program. As with any new ordinance, Regulatory Services will invest in communication and outreach to educate rental property owners and renters before the effective date. We meet regularly with advocacy organizations from both groups and will work with them as we implement. The timing of the effective date also allows us to include information about these ordinances in our 2020 rental license bill. That's the end of the presentation. Andrea, myself are available for questions.
Thank you very much. That's very clear, I think, and understandable. Do any committee members have any questions they'd like to ask? Anybody care to make any comments before we open the public hearing? Okay, then I think we're ready to open the public hearing. Thank you so much for the presentation. We have several pages of people who are requesting to speak at the public hearing. We're going to set a timer for 3 minutes for speech. That's the maximum. Something below that is welcome. So try to take as much time as you need to say what you want up to that, and then to make space for somebody else to speak. I'm just going to read through the list of how people signed in. So I'll open the public hearing and invite the first 3 speakers maybe to form a line if they'd like. Andrea Palumbo, Teresa Delato, and I think it's Gail Smith. And you can introduce yourself and give your address for the record if you feel comfortable doing that. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Andrea Palumbo, and I'm a housing attorney with Homeline. And Homeline is an organization that provides free legal, organizing, educational, and advocacy services to tenants so they are able to solve their own rental history problems. And every year we take thousands of calls from tenants all over the state. In Minneapolis, last year alone, we spoke to over 3,200 renter households, and we are on track to exceed that number this year. At the halfway point, we've spoken to 1,831 renter households. And the majority of these calls are from low-income families, some 86%. Before I came to Homeline, I was a solo practitioner and mainly working in criminal expungement. I was representing individuals seeking to expunge their criminal records. And when I first started, people were primarily interested in expunging their records for employment reasons. But as the housing market got tighter, that shifted over to people needing their records expunged for housing reasons. I was working with people with misdemeanor level convictions for shoplifting who were being denied housing on the basis of that. I also worked with clients who had old felony convictions, more than 10 years old, and were being denied housing out of hand because they had the word felony on their record. And when we tried to bring that up with the management, they threw up their hands and said, "It's our policy, we can't do anything about it." And these were all people who were living in the community. They had paid the price for their crimes. They were working, they were paying taxes, and they were having a terrible time getting housing. I do also want to make it clear that getting a criminal expungement is not an easy process. It's not automatic. So if someone is seeking a criminal expungement, they do have to show the court that the risk of them reoffending is low. So limiting the ability to turn a tenant down solely on the basis of a criminal history or solely because they have the word felony on their record, as this ordinance encourages, totally makes sense. And we know that the longer someone is in the community, the chances of them reoffending goes down. And after about 7 years, the risk of someone with a felony conviction reoffending is just about the same as any other member in the community. And guidance from HUD recognizes that safe, secure housing is a critical factor in keeping people from reoffending. I only have a few seconds left, so I'm going to go fast when we're talking about security deposits. I looked at apartments in my zip code, 55406, this morning, and none mentioned the possibility of a double security deposit. Most listed their rent, most listed that a security deposit would be first month's rent. And we're talking to people very often who are finding out that on the basis of their rental history and their credit history, they have to pay a double deposit. So what was looking like a $1,200 apartment has ballooned to $5,000 just to get the keys to the apartment and move in. So I encourage the committee to pass these ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Teresa Delata, and I've lived in a lot of wards in the city in the last 16 years, mostly because I've had housing issues. I have a good rental history, but because I'm on disability, I cannot make the 3 times the rent for income. Even though I have a guaranteed income every month that covers my rent. Unfortunately, I am going to end up homeless probably in March because they keep on jacking up my rent to an unaffordable level for me. And I am on a waiting list to get a voucher, but I do not have a section choice voucher. I'm on the waiting list that could take months to several years to get. So I'm for renters' protections. I realize this is a first step and that we have many steps to take to really get affordable housing in the city, safe affordable housing in the city. But that is, I don't know whose ward I'm going to be in March. But I ask that you take a look at these renters' protections and take that first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Cecil Smith. I live in this community. I sleep in this community. My kids go to school in this community. I rent this community. This ordinances will have a dramatic effect on our community, especially in the RCAP neighborhoods, which have survived and emerged stronger from past traumas. I'm an advocate for them because I'm with them and their kids every day. This ordinance will bring displacement, not access, as it is intended. I have followed this matter closely, especially in my capacity as a member of your Minneapolis Housing Advisory Committee. I can tell you that we made a recommendation without data, any data. Not one study was examined. But there are now citations supplied with the RCA today. There is one study among the reports on restrictions on criminal screening, but it makes no reference to housing. And another makes a strong case for supportive housing being critical to successful re-entry for formerly incarcerated persons. We didn't examine these reports in our committee. These citations only support the recent analysis of the Wilder Foundation research report that looked at success in housing with supportive services. Please don't move forward until you have data to support your policy making in the market rate housing arena. You owe that to more than 200,000 Minneapolis renters. You also owe it to the formerly incarcerated to explain why folks with criminal sexual conduct convictions in the first degree, subdivision 1B, are exempt from the exemption of prescribed registered sex offenders. Why is a rapist of a 13 to 16-year-old while in a position of authority only covered by the 7-year felony exclusion? It means if otherwise qualified for housing, I could not disqualify them upon release, since it's been more than 7 years since their felony sentencing. I'm troubled by the prospect of them being among the young people in my buildings without further assistance with their transition into society, as I have minimal expectations of support and rehabilitation while incarcerated. Further, they are treated less severely than those with first-degree assault convictions, which the ordinance calls for more than 10 years since sentence. Another remarkable inconsistency is that murder is not included. A murder conviction in the third degree related to a depraved mind is an 8-year, 4-month prison term. They are eligible for housing after 7 years since sentencing, according to the ordinance. In other words, immediately upon release. But the assailant in the first degree with no prior criminal history points has a prison term of 4 years, 9 months, and under the ordinance is not eligible for housing for another 5 years. These inconsistencies in the proposed policy raise reasonable concerns both for the neighboring residents and for just treatment for those under the law who are formerly incarcerated. Again, please don't move forward until you understand what the ordinance will do and how it will really impact our city.
Assad Alawad, Brian Rosas, Dave Ostland, followed by Stephen Schachtman and Andrea Rubenstein. Welcome.
My name is Assad Alawad. I am the Executive Director of New American Development Center. It's a community-based organization that works with the East African Somali community in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. And it is New American Development Center and the community that it works with supports this ordinance because it's a step forward for tenant rights and tenant protection. Landlords take advantage out of low-income, immigrant, historical, underrepresented communities and poor people in our city. Unlawful and sometimes unnecessary evictions made families homelessness, create health risk for children, and affect kids' academic and social well-being. Racial profiling is evident in many evictions in this city, as well as throughout the Twin Cities. This ordinance advances human rights in our city because housing rights is a human rights. And I thank, on behalf of the immigrant community that I work with, 100 of families and children that I work with. We thank you, council members, for this bold leadership in this noble work, and we support this ordinance. And thank you for your leadership in this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, council members. My name is Brian Rosas. I use he, they pronouns. I'm with the Minnesota Youth Collective. I stand before you today not only as a renter, but as a community member who has seen so much oppression in this city. I grew up here, and it has been sad to see how slowly it has been gentrified, how slowly people of color have been displaced, how slowly people of color have been forced into homelessness. Obviously, it's something that is not addressed as often as we would like. So thank you for having these ordinances heard, and thank you for pushing forward on these. I've been doing work on this all summer, and I have found a lot of trends in terms of an oppressive cycle. And I think it starts with housing. Without proper, stable, safe housing, people aren't able to be a quote-unquote functioning member of society. They can't have good health. They can't raise families. They can't have proper education. They can't keep a job. So it is important that we look into these issues and that we see how we can continue to fight for renters and not landlords. Remember that renters, we are not just property, we are people. We're not for profit, we're existing human beings in the community, and I hope that with these ordinances you see that and that other people see that as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hello, thank you, council members. My name is Dave Ostland. I'm a principal with Baker Management Group, which is a small ownership and management company, mostly in Minneapolis. I want to preface my comments by saying that responsible managers and owners want to qualify people for housing. Responsible rental screening is done to help prevent negative housing outcomes, which hurt both landlords and renters. One of the ironies is that irresponsible landlords and bad actors many times are the most relaxed on screening criteria. A lot of times they merely require cash or money order for the first month's rent and security deposit. I'm concerned with this proposed ordinance for several reasons. The first is regarding the section dealing with criminal background checks. Housing providers have an obligation to the best of their abilities to maintain a safe environment for residents. It is troubling that the ordinance does not allow for the consideration of repeat offenses and patterns of criminal behavior past the limited look-back periods. It is much easier to responsibly qualify someone for housing who may have a recent one-off offense that would be allowed to be disqualified than it is with someone having just finished a 7-year prison sentence but who has a long history of multiple felony offenses. Also of concern is the disparity in offenses that are listed in the 7 and 10-year categories for the felony look-back periods. With first-degree assault falling in the 10-year category and murder being in the 7-year category, it seems this ordinance lacks congruency with state sentencing guidelines. The other concern I have is with the unintended consequences this ordinance will have on housing costs. With the ordinance's constraints on credit checks along with criminal background, it is likely that insurance premiums will rise, as will the incidence of negative housing outcomes. Both of these things will ultimately raise the cost of housing across the board. Being that the data from the Wilder study, which was done in conjunction with supportive service nonprofit housing, and does not apply to market rate housing, I would urge this committee and the council to wait for market rate data on housing outcomes prior to moving forward with an ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's going to be a lot better if we don't have these outbursts and we just can listen to one another, and I'm sure that we can have our feelings about it. So let's try to do that and do this in a civil manner, because everybody has free speech rights. So next we have Dave Oslin, is that correct? Okay, do Steve? Go ahead.
Members of the council, my name is Stephen Shackman. My company is Stephen Scott Management, and I've been a housing provider in the city of Minneapolis for over 50 years, in probably every one of your wards. I'm worried about what this ordinance will do to our communities all over this city. Many neighborhoods in Minneapolis have spent years fighting for safe streets. We have spent years trying to get rid of drugs and crime. We have spent years helping people find homes, building up small shops and restaurants. And we've spent years trying to get the city to take on bad landlords, which they should do. Landlords who don't care what happens at their property or what shape it's in. Bad landlords don't care if people can really afford to live there, and don't care if criminal activity hurts a neighborhood. I was a member of the License Review Board, which the City Council has since abandoned. I was a member and helped draft various renter protection ordinances over the last 50 years. None the least was conduct on premise, which again has gone away. This ordinance does not stop bad landlords. It caters to bad landlords. It codifies unsafe practices that we, housing providers, advocates, community leaders, hear about year after year after year. We should all in this council hearing room all want property managers to responsibly screen applicants for the safety of residents and neighbors. This ordinance says it's not okay to do so. We should all in this council hearing room want property managers to consider whether an applicant will be able to make regular rent payments. This ordinance says it's not okay to do so. We should all want property managers to check if an applicant has a history of damaging property. This ordinance says it's not okay to do so. We should all want to keep this city affordable to renters. Unfortunately, it has become unaffordable to many because of the many exorbitant taxes that we are paying as property owners that have been imposed upon us by the city of Minneapolis. This ordinance will make it less affordable, in my opinion, for renters. There are many problems with this proposal. It's vague, it's inconsistent, and it's ill-conceived. But one of the worst problems, in my opinion, is that it does nothing to stop the bad landlords. It says it's okay to not to care about your rental properties or your renters. We need to pause, and we need to consider what this ordinance is going to do for this city that we all live and work in. Have a real discussion with neighborhoods and good housing providers. Build up supportive housing and social service networks for people in need. Of the 1,228 apartment units that our company manages in the city of Minneapolis, we're paying over $3.6 million in taxes. We feel that we are providing quality, affordable housing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And 1,400.
Andrea Rubenstein, Dan Larson, and Ricardo Perez. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Gordon and members of the committee. My name is Andrea Rubenstein, and I'm here as a member of Jewish Community Action and its Minneapolis Community Housing Team to speak in support of the two draft ordinances. JCA works on economic justice issues with a racial lens, and so we very much appreciate and support the recognition of the great need for protection so needed. However, and ironically, we also have some concerns with the language of the ordinances, but because we want them to be strengthened, and with our mutual goal of providing secure and stable housing for all the people in Minneapolis. One of the concerns, and again, although we very much support the purposes underlying the draft ordinances, we see these only as a first step. There are a lot of serious problems in Minneapolis with housing maintenance, unfair evictions, the screening issues that you're seeking to address. And so we hope you will consider some of the concerns that we have. One is that we believe the enforcement mechanism needs serious strengthening. There's no protection for reprisal against renters or potential renters who submit a complaint. The potential legal remedies outside the ordinance create a burden that many renters cannot bear or find to be ineffective. For example, a complaint about the violation of the screening ordinance cannot possibly be resolved before that unit is lost. It's also not all that relevant that reliance on the Housing Inspections Department is realistic. For instance, is there adequate staff? Does the budget support the added costs of enforcement? How much priority can a busy department give to enforcement, especially when the message is that the city may enforce, but it's discretionary? Remedies are inadequate if the goal is to sustain and maintain the pool of decent and affordable housing in Minneapolis. If a landlord is to lose its license, how does that help the renters when they may then lose their homes? Think of Stephen Friends. Why not rent abatement rather than loss of license? Regarding the security deposit, while the principle, again, is a great one, we worry that there's no cap otherwise in the ordinance for some other costs, like the application fee or the deposit or the monthly costs for pets. Can those costs be shifted to those other hidden costs that are allowed in the ordinance? The language about individual assessments gives us pause too in the screening ordinance because it allows her wide discretion and has some undefined criteria. We respectfully urge you to consider having a city staff person to assist renters, enhancing the enforcement process so that there's notice and opportunity to correct, mediation,
If you have
appeal.
additional comments, you can always submit them in writing.
Okay,
too.
thank you.
Sorry to cut you off. Dan Largan and then Ricardo Perez.
Good afternoon. My name's Dan Largent. I'm not an owner, but I operate properties in Whittier and Stevens Square Park. And we purchased and stabilized many problem properties, converting them to Tier 1 with city's assistance. Still, the majority of our rents are under 60% of AMI, and we're piloting 4D to maintain affordability. We now work with Section 8 nonprofit subsidies and emergency assistance. A lot of this ordinance actually conforms to our best practices, but I have 3 targeted areas of concerns that I wanted to bring to this committee. The first is on the deposit limits. Since the recession, we've operated a program to help place higher financial risk applicants in market rate housing. Instead of denying applicants outright for outstanding debts or recent evictions for non-payment, we accept additional deposit money to offset that risk of default they present. We provide a path to use that deposit towards rent once they've shown 6 months of positive rental history, so that they have access to that during their first year of tenancy. In 2018, only $1,400 out of $700,000 in refunded or credit deposits was retained towards damages. These deposits are used solely as a means to mitigate risk, not exploited as a means for profit. 28% of our residents, so about 300 households, have stable housing because of this program. The majority of these applicants would lose access to housing under the current ordinance language. So I asked this committee to consider an amendment or provide an alternative path other than denial for those that don't meet the inclusive screening criteria that's in the ordinance, that let us fill that hole with mitigating that market risk and still keep those people housed. My second point is been addressed on inequitable criminal screening criteria. By having a look-back period from the dates of sentencing and not the completion of any prison term, that waiting period to access market-rate housing is often inversely proportional to the severity of the crime. If we could evaluate that from prison release, even shorten that look-back period, it would both be more equitable, provide more housing access to so many people who have lower-level offenses, and still allow for screening practices that support safe communities. Lastly, in the most recent draft, there are some concerns about enforcement ambiguity. Without having a notice of violation and no defined appeals process as part of any claim, there's concerns about where the identification of burden of proof would fall, since many of this, to me, would be processed similar to a fair housing claim, and I wish that would be defined better before this moves along. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ricardo Perez. And the next speaker after Ricardo is Jennifer Spadine and then Bernadette Horning.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for hosting us here. My name is Ricardo Perez. I work here in Minneapolis with the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. And I'm here representing Equity in Place. Equity in Place is a diverse group of strategic partners from organizations led by people of color and housing advocacy organizations who believe that everyone in the Twin Cities region deserves access to opportunity wherever they want to live. And as an organizer, I have met communities that have been the recipient time and time again of a legacy of systemic issues that have disproportionately affected us through a long, long time. So this is not an irrational fear. Are not perhaps, my community doesn't speak with like numbers. It's a reality that we live on a daily basis that affects our physical or mental, emotional health. So households of color are vastly more likely to be renters than white households. So when we're talking about who will be the recipient of this, we should put a face into that and to say that these are going to be households of color. For generations, our communities have been targeted by racist criminal justice, immigration, credit scoring, and banking systems that have intentionally marginalized, criminalized, and economically exploited households of color. Again, this is by design. We're here because of design. We're not here by chance. Reasonable, limited look-back policies related to credit and criminal history are critical to removing unjust barriers to housing that disproportionately impacts households of color. So I think like you all have the opportunity right now to make a difference on that situation that again is disproportionately affecting us. Especially in neighborhoods that communities of color call home, tenants are exploited with excessive and burdensome security deposits and far higher levels of evictions. We commend the Minneapolis City Council in taking the necessary steps towards equitable housing in our vibrant, majority renter city, and look forward to continuing to work with you on many additional policy changes we need to ensure safe, affordable, dignified housing for all in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities region. I want to use my last 30 seconds to read a quote from Cesar Chavez, and it says, "Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person that has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore." Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Spadini. I am a property manager. I am the owner of Guardian Property Management and Maintenance. I am also a City of Minneapolis resident. We house about 1,200 residents within the city. I am here today to oppose the ordinance changes due to the housing instability it will cause. I fully agree with providing more housing for more residents, but a blanket ordinance has unintended consequences. Once a person has found a home, the current proposal has no plan for keeping residents housed. There is a mention in the draft of cost-burdened residents and housing playing a key in preventing recidivism, but no mention of plan of how to keep the residents housed. As a person experienced in housing, I've had the privilege of housing residents through organizations like The Link, Wilder Foundation, St. Stephen's, Ascension Haven Housing. I've even worked with Minneapolis Regulatory Services and MACV to help house homeless veterans. These successful situations had case management and the resident success plan in the forefront. The ordinance you propose has no such success plan for the resident and will result in housing instability. In my housing experience, I have seen plans that create stable housing and plans that do not. I strongly urge you to not approve of the ordinance as it is today, and for us to work together to build a sustainable model to find residents housing and to keep them housed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bernadette Horning here. And then I think it might be Nicole Beckstrand is next, and then Matt Moyat.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon and members of the committee. My name is Bernadette Hornig, and I work for Hornig Companies, a firm that owns and manages apartments in 8 of the city's 13 wards. I appreciate the time that many council members have spent with me reviewing the ordinance and listening to alternatives and ideas. Unfortunately, I still have some concerns that as drafted, this ordinance will not achieve the stated goal of protecting renters and will drain city resources as staff struggle to enforce vague language. As a result, I'm here today to urge members of the committee to reconsider the language in front of you. Let me be clear that there are portions of this ordinance that I do strongly support, specifically related to credit history evaluation, disregarding arrest history, vacated records, and juvenile records. They codify in ordinance Hornig Company's standard business practices that are in place today. As I've shared with many of you, Hornig Company screening criteria, like many of my other colleagues, has been established to screen as many people into housing as possible rather than to screen folks out. Renters are the lifeblood of our business, and serving them fairly and ethically is a practice that we've put in place since our inception in South Minneapolis over 60 years ago. In addition to the inconsistencies in some of the criminal history language that others have mentioned, I'm most concerned with the vague income test provision and the lack of due process afforded to managers by skirting the notice provisions required for other violations under the Housing Maintenance Code. The proposal requires housing providers to allow an exception where an applicant can demonstrate a history of successful rent payments with incomes less than 3 times the rent. How are managers supposed to approach this exception? What if the new rent is higher than the old rent? What is a history of successful rent payment? How many late rent payments are allowed? How much below 3 times is acceptable? Federal housing programs, including Section 8 and Section 42, use the 3 times threshold as a test to ensure that people have enough money to cover the cost of living beyond rent. Implementing this vague language is a recipe for disputes, conflict, and protracted enforcement efforts by city staff. Which leads to my next concern. The proposed ordinance will add tenant screening and security deposit provisions into its maintenance code. As drafted, the ordinance skirts the standard notice provisions that are outlined in the code. For most code issues, the city is required to give a property owner notice where there's a violation or alleged violation. The notice specifies the violation and remedial action required. The property owner is given reasonable time to correct. Under the proposed ordinance, city staff will determine if a violation is based solely on information provided by a denied applicant. These situations will likely not be black and white, and property owners should be given some right to present their side of the story to appropriate city staff before a violation is issued. When I've raised enforcement concerns about the provisions, I've been told the details will be worked out after it's passed. Why not take the time to get it right? If you can't explain it, you shouldn't pass it. That's just not good government. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Council Chair. I am Nicole Beckstrand. I am the current president of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. You may not know, though, I have been a housing advocate my entire life, sitting on housing nonprofit boards, doing executive sleepouts to raise money for homelessness, working hands-on in the shelters and the food shelves with my family on a regular basis. I find it compelling that I now represent the very people that can help solve the problem if they were to be listened to and collaborated with. When I think about this ordinance, I think about the people I see all over the city, people in need, people with serious problems, not just lack of housing. I believe that housing is a stabilizer. It allows one to address any issues they may have. However, I also believe that the supportive services that are just as important as the four walls that surround them. I often think of the 20-something woman and her dog who I used to see every day as I got off the Washington Avenue exit to 94 while going to my prior job. Her face showed pain, distance, and fear. Sometimes she asked for money, and sometimes she just stood there hugging her dog. How will this ordinance help her? It won't. I also think about the homeless man who came to our barbecue last week with the cardboard sign he carried all day. We talked, he had a hot dog and soda, and then he went away into the night. How will this ordinance help him? It won't. For both of these individuals, their challenges are well beyond the lack of four walls. This ordinance doesn't improve mental health. It doesn't fix joblessness. It doesn't treat substance abuse. It doesn't fix the root cause of housing instability. This ordinance, without the appropriate supportive services, sets these people up for failure. And no, I don't think either of these people should stay on the streets. I think the problems with the proposal are obvious. There's a lack of data. Or testing to show that this will deliver positive change for the people most in need. Yes, there's a lot of data to support the problem. There just is no data to support this ordinance. The market deserves a process that's data-driven and backed by research. That's not what's happening here. When the city works with good housing providers, everybody wins. Look no further to your very own stable homes, stable schools. We urge you to open yourselves up to real dialogue, to wait for data and research that's coming soon on this issue instead of legislating in the dark. As the leader of the Multi-Housing Association, I promise I will bring the providers to the table. I want all who seek housing to find the solution that works for them for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Mayotte. I live in Minneapolis, and I own 3 rentals. 2 of them are in Minneapolis. I've been a landlord for about 10 years, and I just want to say it's not an easy job, and it doesn't pay my bills. I work 40 hours a week, and then I work on my properties in the evenings and weekends. I typically work 60 to 80-hour weeks. I'm on call 24/7. 2 weeks ago, I took a vacation from my job to work 14-hour days on my properties. I'm not a slumlord. I maintain my properties. If I'm lucky, my properties pay for my own house payment. I'm not getting rich at this. Every time I've had to kick out a tenant, it's cost me between $3,000 and $5,000. That's 2 years worth of profit for me, okay? It's not pocket change. The last property I had problems with ended up with a choice of throwing a family of 5 out or eating a $9,000 back rent and damage to property bill. I chose the $9,000 and waited for them to find another place. When people leave, they don't say, "I'm sorry, I'll pay you back," or "Thanks for being a nice guy." That's what you get for being a landlord, is constantly getting kicked in the teeth. I've never filed an eviction because it costs $450 after knowing that you're going to lose $5,000 in rent, knowing that you'll have to take another day off of work, and to go to court and file an eviction is not an easy pill to swallow. My banks don't care if my tenants don't pay. I still have to pay my mortgage payment. I don't own these properties, the banks do. Before I started a screening process and just taking people on their word, about half of my tenants were bad. And ever since I started screening tenants, they're all great tenants. Now, I realize our society has major issues with social, economic, and racial injustice, and I don't feel these problems are going to be fixed by forcing landlords to accept lower standards. My tenants are students, people in the service industry, nonprofit workers, mechanics. Some of them have job instability, but they're honest working people. All my properties are tier 1, and all of them are 20% below market rate on average. I try to give my tenants a break and only raise the rents when the city raises taxes or fees on me. If the city passes this ordinance and treats me like a slumlord, forcing me to go back to every other tenant trashing my property, I will be forced to raise my rents to make up for future losses or sell my properties in Minneapolis and go to a different city. if this housing at-risk tenants is important to the city, then the city should provide rent guarantees to landlords who accept at-risk tenants. I feel this ordinance is an attempt to go after the little guy. It does nothing for these big developers because nobody with felonies or poor credit scores can afford to live in these big complexes. Thanks for your time, and I'd ask you to reject this or make some major amendments. Thank you.
Next three speakers are Ivory, Corey, and Eric. So Ivory, Taylor, it would be helpful if people could express their opinions in a quieter way. I don't know if a thumbs down would work or anything like that, but that way we can proceed through the meeting and let people speak. So following Ivory Taylor is Corey Lynn and Eric Hoagie.
Chair Gordon, committee, and other council members. My name is Ivory Taylor. I'm a tenant organizer with Homeline at 3555 Bloomington Avenue in Minneapolis. I'm a lifelong and former Minneapolis renter and an individual who has experienced homelessness and housing instability. Historically, housing policy has favored landlords over tenants, and this has led to inequality and discrimination in our housing systems. People of low wealth, people of color, youth, people with disabilities, immigrants, formerly incarcerated people, and families face significant barriers to accessing rental housing due to the abilities of landlords to screen out renters based on factors they decide are important, whether or not there is any evidence to prove that these factors actually have an impact on somebody's ability to be a successful renter. Society has valued property owners over the people living in, caring for, and paying for each property's upkeep and taxes through their rental fees. This is not just. It's time we put policies in place which help to ease the consequences of institutionalized racial and economic discrimination, which have created systems of deep inequality in our communities. It is beyond time for us to take corrective action against a status quo which has led us to the housing crisis we are facing. As an organizer who works directly with tenants who face threats both to accessing and maintaining housing, I see every day that there are significant barriers for many people to obtain decent, safe, affordable, and equitable housing. I am thankful to the City Council for recognizing these barriers and working to create solutions which value the lives and contributions of the over 50% of Minneapolis residents who are renters. Thank you for engaging in conversation with the community starting well over a year ago about steps you could take to reduce barriers to dignified housing. As landlords threaten to raise rent to retaliate against protections for renters, we thank you for understanding that we cannot be held hostage to making progress because of economic blackmail. We also want to thank you for previous meaningful steps towards balancing this historically unequal tenant-landlord relationship, such as the Section 8 non-discrimination ordinance, and future policies to be considered around relocation benefits, renter opportunity to purchase, and more policies that improve access, housing conditions, and prevent involuntary displacement. We ask that you please pass this ordinance without any amendments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, council members. So my name is Asher. I'm the president and CEO of Property Solutions and Services. We manage affordable housing in the Twin Cities. We manage a little under 200 units in the 55411 zip code. My biggest concern is the security deposit limitations. We utilize the security deposit of a double security deposit, if you heard from another member, to mitigate the risk and to allow individuals with high barriers to be housed. We've had great success with this, and my concern is that if we're unable to do that, we no longer will be able to house these individuals that you're not even protecting in this current ordinance. My other concern with affordable housing is that this legislation of it being passed will really affect continued growth of affordable housing in the urban core of Minneapolis. I managed 55 units in North Minneapolis on Golden Valley Road, and over a 2-year span, the ownership sold the buildings. One of them was 1900 Thomas Avenue that some of you members were part of with legal aid. As the new ownership that came in increased rent. The ownership sold that building because they were concerned with looming legislation. The next building that then got sold was sold to a company out of Illinois via Hong Kong. And so my concern with affordable housing is that this is going to drive
drive those good for-profit companies out of the market and into the suburbs. The second thing is the data of the 5-year conviction that Wilder published is extremely flawed and should be really looked at detailed if you're using that as the reason for the 5-year. The final thing is I would encourage the council members to find ways to incentivize affordable housing through other opportunities similar to the 4D tax incentive program that I think was a huge success. Also, Stable Homes, Stable Schools was a huge success. And that's, I guess that's what I'd like to say.
All right, thank you very much. And is Corey, Corey?
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Lynn, and I am a renter in the Lindale neighborhood and am staff at Powderhorn neighborhood. I'm speaking here today on both sides in full support of these renter protections. In Powderhorn, residents' greatest concerns that we hear are often about housing and the lack of affordability. We hear many stories about how rising rents are stretching renters thin, how high security costs are keeping people out, and how availability in our neighborhoods are almost non-existent. In this housing market, the pressure is fully falling on renters. While not all landlords are intentionally acting as barriers or as barriers to racial or economic justice, many unintentionally are, and they abuse a system that requires a renter to jump through millions of barriers in order to exercise their rights. We all know how complicated the system can be, especially if you are a working person. We know at Powderhorn that having stable housing for all is a strong tool to support healthy and safe communities. We believe that all people deserve a safe place to live as a right, regardless of how much they may be a market risk. City leadership has been saying that they want to invest in better, more equitable housing, and the people are here today asking you to please stand by it and vote for these protections. For all of those who are asking for enforcement clarity, strengthening, more support services, and even a strengthening of the language, I agree. Yes, and we need these ordinances as well as other supportive programs for homelessness and housing as well. Obviously, one ordinance will not solve all of our issues. This is merely a drop in the bucket that we have turned out and forced to support because we know that it is a first step on the way to all these other housing laws that we will need. So please today vote to support these renters ordinances and do more in the future. Thank you.
Tabitha, Hamza Hassan, and Luis Gaguana.
Thank you, Chair Gordon and committee members. My name is Eric Hauge. I'm the Executive Director of Homeline. I'm also a resident of Ward 4, and at one time I was a landlord in Minneapolis. I'm here to just simply to deliver a collaborative joint public comment letter that is in support of these proposed policies and is signed by hundreds of individuals and nearly 30 organizations that serve, engage, and represent thousands of Minneapolis residents. The groups involved represent a broad variety of perspectives: legal services, tenant organizers and tenant associations, racial and economic justice-based collaboratives, faith-based groups, community developers, landlords, and supportive housing providers, neighborhood associations, groups that both organize and serve people experiencing homelessness, environmental and energy justice groups, local businesses, and organizations that advocate with people who have disabilities. Some of these organizations and individuals are here today, and you've either heard from them or you will hear from them. Many, like most of our low-income renter clients at Homeline, are not here because a weekday afternoon hearing is really not accessible to them. So please consider the thousands that are represented by the statement in this letter. The comments were delivered via email this morning, and I'll leave a copy at the desk.
Thank you very much. Then Tabitha Montgomery, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Tabitha Montgomery, and I serve one of 70 neighborhood organizations in the city. I extend my appreciation to Council President Bender, Council Member Ellison, and the entire Housing Policy and Development team that have brought these two draft ordinances forward to support renter protections for all. Recognizing this committee's role is to help establish and adopt policies that ensures the functioning of this city and the overall care of its citizens, I offer a few words of encouragement that you're not unduly swayed by hyperbolic language, a binary view that suggests supporters of these ordinances do not want safe communities, or that the status quo around who can access housing is sufficient. Under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, housing is a protected area, and it is illegal to treat you differently in housing because of your race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, disability, public assistance, sexual orientation, or familial status. It would be important to note that it would be great if we didn't have to make that list of attributes. But I am encouraging you that you do not let what seems to be an inordinate responsibility fall by the wayside by thinking that something as simple as putting a cap on security deposit or limited look back is too audacious, that we cannot claim this moment to take the first steps towards treating this community as a more whole community. I encourage you not only to dig deep if more data is required, but that you put forward clear staff direction to get it, but not abdicate your responsibility to help us to move forward. If I didn't have to list all of those attributes, we could have simply said housing is for all. Yes? But I had to list them. I can restate them, but I will not. We are at a critical time. I am not here against well-intentioned landlord who pulls their weight. I am not here to say that there is obviously not more work that we all need to do to ensure that this city is truly for everyone and it's not just a mantra or a tagline. Do not give up on your responsibilities as elected and or appointed officials for the city of Minneapolis, because we have not. We continue to show up. We continue to use our voices. We continue to ask you to listen to the numbers. We hear from hundreds of residents, and it simply is this memo. Regardless of how life changes, it certainly changes. But we should be allowed to change. When we prevent people from having a safe and livable place to lay their head because of things that they have committed not only 7 years ago, but 2 moments ago, we have failed. I encourage you to dig deep, be bold, take this step, and embrace the action and the choice that you have before us. Make a change.
Hello, my name is Hamza Hassan. I am a community organizer for the African Career Education and Resource, Inc. I work around tenant rights, tenant advocacy. I'm also a renter in your district, Councilmember Bender. And I'm actually a lifelong renter. My mother was also a renter, so my entire life I have been a tenant. And we've heard from a lot of people today who are claiming to come on behalf of tenants, on behalf of community. But what we find is amongst these people, only a few of them have actually gone to community, told them about this, asked them to come forth, advocate for them on a daily basis. One of those people, or one of those groups of people is the Equity in Place table, who is here today. Those are people I know who come for community. As far as the naysayers of this ordinance, a lot of them are some of these high eviction filers. So a UD can be filed as soon as a day after the late payment, after the cutoff for lateness, which is honestly very unjust, because a homeowner has about 2 weeks until they're late on their mortgage. UDs that resulted in favor of tenants are still on record. So if they went to court and there is a settlement, the UD is still on their record, and I can actually vouch because I've been right across at the housing court for many of my constituents. In most cases, the amount asked for is on average 1,000 more than the original amount with these settlements. You're asking this from low-income people, mind you. We have somebody today who said that they manage a property that and said that they advocate for tenants. In 2 zip codes where I work in Brooklyn Park, there are 550 eviction filings. More than half of those did not result in the tenant being removed. One of those people who actually spoke out today had 135 of those eviction filings. I'm not going to name anybody, but I could if I wanted to right now. Stephen Scott. But anywho, what we got also is I have a tenant who has a 12-year-old felony on record. She cannot move from where she lives. A nonviolent felony on top of that. She's a mother of 6. And whenever she does want to move, what the property manager does is start filing late payments, saying that there's maintenance damage that they've done, taking them to housing court. This person has probably been the person I've taken there most because they know that they have the upper hand against somebody with a felony. They know that they're not going to find another house. You better just pay up. And we're asking these people to return back to society. So if we really do, we should give them housing and a way to work, family, so on and so forth. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Luis? Is Luis here? Luis? Welcome. Excellent. Thank you.
Dale, Luis. Hi. Línea por línea.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Luis Cabana.
Good afternoon. My name is Luis Caguana.
Estoy aquí, cuestión del abuso de las compañías multimillonarios.
I'm here to talk about the abuse of the multi-million-dollar companies.
Ellos ahorita quieren pasar la ley de revisión de récord. Rechazamos esto, no tiene por qué hacer eso porque quieren abusar más medio de eso.
They don't have to negate these ordinances right now because there's so much abuse as it stands.
Nosotros pedimos reparaciones, soluciones. Ellos nunca jamás quieren solucionar.
What's interesting to me is that we always ask for repairs, we always ask for solutions, and they don't actually want to solve the issues at hand.
Pocas palabras, ellos convirtieron como monstruos.
It seems like these companies, these large landlord companies, have converted themselves into monsters.
Solución es, ellos respetan, ellos solucionan, nosotros respetamos también igual.
You know, the only thing that we're asking for is respect, and we're asking to be respected and be respected in return.
Quiero mandar ese mensaje para otras compañías, las corporaciones grandes.
I want to send a message to the larger corporations.
Deben apoyar a nosotros, no a los racistas, a los multimillonarios.
They should support us. They shouldn't support the racist, the multi-million-dollar companies.
Futuro nosotros también podemos apoyar a ellos lo que necesitan.
What we need is that we could support them in the future if that's what's needed.
Lo que queremos es que respeten, como nosotros traten como ser humano, no como un objeto a botar a la basura.
And what we're just asking for is that we get treated like human beings, not like objects that are thrown in the trash.
Los dueños o malos dueños solamente usan como un objeto, usar después a botar a la basura.
Right, and it seems like these bad landlords are just using us as objects to throw us in the trash.
Es más triste para un pobre cuando uno sacara adelante a nuestros hijos, ellos llevan todo.
It's really, really sad to be poor when all we're trying to do is put our children forward.
De nuestros bolsillos se enriquecen las compañías. De nuestros bolsillos ellos viven en una mansión grande, lujo.
And they're taking all the money out of our poor pockets. And where are they living? In really, really luxurious mansions.
You gotta tell them. Tell it.
Queremos es, repito, queremos que respeten para respetar. Si ellos se respetan, nosotros no vamos a estar aquí pidiendo.
The thing that I'm just asking for is to be respected by landlords. If I was respected, I wouldn't have to be here today.
Cuando pide solución, debe solucionar. Es como ser humano, debe entender. No solamente piensan dinero, pero nunca hay soluciones.
This is a solution. We should actually move forward to solutions and not only think about your solutions that are connected to money.
Ellos en vez de solucionar desalojo.
So instead of actually looking for solutions, what do they do? They evict you.
como ellos nunca vivieron, para mí, para uno es como ellos nunca fueron niños, no saben qué es la necesidad de los niños.
It feels like to me that they've never been children before, or they don't remember what it was to be a child before.
Los niños necesitan educación, respeto.
You know, with children, they need education and respect.
Gracias.
Thank you so much.
Next is Daquan Dominique and Robert, I'm not sure the last name, and Takara Eiler. Oh, Roberto. See.
Good afternoon. Okay, so I'm a caseworker at St. Stephen's Homeless Shelter. And basically one of the challenges that I find difficult when I'm helping my clients is basically going back and doing their, sorry.
That's all right.
One of the many challenges that my clients face on the request of housing is their past convictions, and some spanning back to basically 20 years with no other convictions and a lack of limited look back and cap on security deposits and keeping individuals in a vicious cycle of homelessness. In my personal experience, I've been in the client situation, and it's bad enough like when you're homeless, you're barely working or you're not working at all and you're in a shelter, and you're looking for housing as well. So they're trying to move past that, and you know, they made mistakes over 10 years ago, and I feel like at our shelter we give second chances, and I feel like you guys should give them a second chance as well. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Roberto?
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Roberto de Arriba, a South Minneapolis renter and co-director of Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, or Renters United for Justice. We're an organization that fights for renters in Minneapolis and beyond. In the last 4 years, I've spent my life building with more than 2,000 renters who have been fighting against unscrupulous landlords that benefit from our current housing system. I've seen people live without heat for a winter. I've seen children suffer and parents be tested to their bones. But most importantly, I've seen renters fight back against all this injustice, and that's why I know we need these ordinances to pass. As it stands now, landlords have all the power. With power comes enormous profits, and those profits are at the expense of human life. And not just any human life, poor, working-class people of color. For our city to thrive, we need to shift our focus from a landlord-centered city to a tenant-centered city that protects those who are the most vulnerable. Minneapolis has a boundless supply of luxury housing and a closed supply of affordable housing, and it's by design. Evictions happen at an alarming pace, more than 4,000 a year, and that doesn't include those who are intimidated to leave before courts. Displacement isn't just a word we should throw around lightly. It's a word that shocks people to their core and destroys everything a home and a neighborhood should be, a calm, warming, centered place. Landlords benefit 2 times from not having these ordinances. Once for penalizing those who have already been displaced and not returning their money when they apply for housing, and twice by denying entry into a neighborhood. Do we want to live in a city that focuses on landlords' bankroll, or do we want a city that prioritizes a single mother in her own community? I know where I stand, but where do we stand as a city, as one Minneapolis? These ordinances are a small step in the right direction. We need mass funding for tenant cooperatives, tenant unions, new public housing projects, rent control, and the right for tenants to purchase their buildings from property owners before selling them to investors that don't care about us. That's why I'm a proponent of passing limited look back for tenants and cap security deposits. I want to leave you today with one image. Imagine a family. Now, imagine a building. Now place them side by side. I bet anyone in this room would choose a family. I'm asking you to choose human life over profits and buildings. Choose mothers, choose children, and choose a future that we deserve. Thank you.
Takara followed by Monique and Chloe.
Hi, I'm Takara Eiler. I represent the North Side. I just recently was able to get my house. I have been through 2.5 years of organizing around my slumlord, and without any, I guess, support from our local city electives, I have dealt with a lot of stuff, as in my electricity on one side of my house being blown out, space heaters in the wintertime when my furnace went out. Even now, even though I'm a homeowner, we're still going around with my electricity being cut off because my utility bills being high, water being cut off because the utility bills are being high, and still no support. I'm in charge of another portfolio, Meldal, no support. You guys are up here. We elected y'all to help us. And regardless of what the ordinance says or anything else that's going on, we are not being supported like we should. We should not have to go through 2 years of this, make a whole list of ordinance that needs to be changed. Jeremiah, Philippe, you guys are representations of our neighborhood. This right here is starting to get tedious, annoying, irritating. I want to see y'all, but I want to see y'all like community gatherings, not sitting in here looking like judges. I'm very emotional right now. My words are all messed up, but we need better support. We need a better system. We should not be still sitting here fighting the same thing that we fought 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I am traumatized from what I'm going through already. And when I go into other people's houses, it's like living with God all over again. It's not fair. I support the ordinance, maybe not a lot of stuff that's in it, but I do support it. It still needs work, from my opinion, and you guys need to do way better than this, and it should not take us sitting here doing this. You guys live in our neighborhoods. You guys are here. Y'all should know what it is that's going on. Come on now.
Thank you. Monique Carville and Chloe Jackson, Elabella Rodriguez.
Wait, here you go.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Chloe Jackson. Okay. I just want to start off by saying thank you. This is a start, and I know you all know that we do need more. So I am a renter, I am an organizer with Inquilinos Unidos, and also with the Central Neighborhood Association, and we support these ordinances. I have a couple questions. I want to ask the landlords here, how is it that you all can do a background check on us? We can't do a background check on you guys. Let me finish, y'all. We don't know if you all are great landlords, like you all are looking for great tenants. We don't know if you all do your repairs. We don't know if you have a bad credit history, so you're trying to reap the benefits off of us and collect money off of us. So I want to know, can we do those things with you guys? We don't know if you all are criminals, if you guys are sex offenders, if you guys molested little kids and we're trying to rent from you guys. We don't have none of that stuff, but you all get to invade our privacy and do that against us. Where is that fair at? Also, thank you, and I'm done.
Thank you. Next up is Alabea Rodriguez. And just to let folks know, typically what I prefer here is if your comments can be directed to the chair and even your rhetorical questions, that will help us. So speak to the chair. Welcome.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Alibella Rodríguez.
Good evening. My name is Alibella Rodríguez.
Y yo estoy a favor de que pase la ordenanza.
I'm in favor to pass this ordinance.
Porque yo creo que es injusto que pidan, por ejemplo, cuando va uno a pedir o buscar un nuevo hogar para nuestras familias.
I think that is not just right, like when we go and to try to find a place for our families.
Que piden muchos requisitos, por ejemplo, piden el depósito.
Like an example, like they ask for many things. An example is asking for deposit security.
Depósito y también piden crédito.
And also asking for a credit score.
Y también piden antecedentes penales.
And also they asking for the criminal record.
Yo pienso que es injusto porque lo único que hacemos nosotros es buscar un hogar para la familia.
I think that is not fair because the only thing that we're doing is try to find a place for our families.
y los pues son muy elevados. Por ejemplo, a veces las rentas no pueden encontrar rentas económicas sino de 1,500 para arriba.
And the prices for all this is too high. I've been trying to find a place, and the rent of the price they are asking for the rent is like $1,500 for an apartment.
Y si, por ejemplo, toda una familia y a veces no tienen solo un trabajo, yo pienso que y es injusto lo que están pidiendo porque a veces no tiene uno el suficiente dinero para pagar lo que es 1,500 de renta más 1,500 de depósito.
If you think on a family who only a person had a full-time job, it's too hard to pay the $1,500. It's hard to have enough economy for pay rent and also the utilities.
Y también, por ejemplo, yo tuve la mala experiencia de que vivíamos en un edificio, nos desalojaron solo por pedir reparaciones.
And also I've been having a bad experience, like I used to live in a building where I get evicted only for asking for repairs.
Y fuimos varios los vecinos que salimos afectados y nos costó mucho trabajo el poder encontrar un lugar donde vivir.
There was many of my neighbors who have that situation, and also we've been having a hard time to find a new place to live.
Porque nos pedían crédito, nos pedían la renta, el depósito y que ganáramos 3 veces lo de la renta, el cual yo creo que nadie aquí puede ganar más que los que tienen yo pienso que los que tienen una carrera o algo pueden ganarse dinero.
It was hard because they asking for 3 times the income of the rent, and also they asking for security deposits and also application, and I think like no one who have low income have enough money to pay 3 times the amount of the rent, and also I think only the people who can afford that is people who have a college, maybe a high income.
Y aparte también de los depósitos, cuando uno aplicar piden que pague uno la aplicación, lo que creo que también es injusto, porque se supone, están pidiendo dinero para aplicaciones, y van muchas familias. Yo creo que es un robo lo que están haciendo, porque no nos aseguran que nos van a rentar ese apartamento que estamos buscando, y se están quedando con los el dinero de las aplicaciones.
And also other thing that they're asking that we pay is the application for just apply for an apartment, and I think that is not fair because we don't have any sorry, I forget the word. We don't have any, they don't give us the opportunity or give us an answer that we're gonna have the place to live. So they just take the money, we don't have a place to live, and we just spend money to pay for these applications.
Y a los dueños lo único que les importa es ganar y ganar más dinero. No se ponen a pensar en las familias que tienen hijos y que tienen que buscar un lugar para su familia.
And the landlords only care about money. They don't think about the families. They don't think about the kids. They don't think that the families have to work more to afford housing and also utilities and the things that they need for the kids.
Ojalá y todos los que están aquí pensaran bien, ¿verdad? Y hicieran el favor de pasar la ordenanza que beneficiaría a todo mundo. Y también yo pienso que también a las madres solteras, cuando tiene uno una pareja al lado, es una ayuda para uno, pero cuando son madres solteras también es muy difícil para ellas el trabajar y pagar renta más el depósito.
And also I think I hope everybody think better for the tenants instead the landlords, and also I invite you to thinking about this single mothers or single fathers, because a couple who can afford or work together can have at least the income, but for the single mothers it's hard for them to pay all these expenses.
Es todo, gracias.
This is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Elaine, Jennifer, and Lee.
I'm Elaine. Good afternoon. My name is Elaine Altamirano. I live in the city of Minneapolis for 12 years. I moved to Minneapolis when I was 17 years old from Mexico, and it was so hard for me to find a place to live because I don't have a rental history, I don't have a credit history, and I've been discriminated also to having 2 kids. I've been I've been being forced to talk to my kids about this discrimination, which is hard for me because they are only 11 and 8 years old. And it's hard for me to explain to my kids, like, I cannot affordable a place to live. And they having these experiences. And also my daughter wants to be here today, but she was scared to tell the landlord to say, hey, maybe I'm gonna be discriminated to be a little girl. So I'm in favor to pass these ordinances because being a woman, a mother who have a husband, is hard even for us because my husband having to have 3 jobs to pay the rent. So it's not fair that. And also landlords only care about profit, don't care about families, they don't care about the trauma that caused to our families or kids. The kids are the present, not the future. We need to take care about our present. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I have been a resident of Minneapolis off and on since 2009. I'm currently living in Powderhorn. I had about $20,000 in debt after college, and I worked very hard to pay that off. So I'm currently debt-free, and for ethical reasons, I don't believe in taking out more debt. But that means that my very good credit score is going lower and lower because I refuse to take out more debt. I'm also low income because I'm the single income earner in our family. So that means that regardless of very good credit and years of on-time payments to rent and utilities and years of good references from landlords, I still have to pay 2 times security deposit and the first month's rent just to get into a new rental space. As we are currently paying around 70% of our income in rent, this makes it very difficult to find a new place to live. And it's very stressful for us. So I'd like to ask the City Council members to please pass the Renter Protection Ordinance, as this would be very helpful to families like mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Lee Samuelson and Michael Dahl, and then Ariana Feldman.
Chair Gordon, members of the committee, I think here we have some sensible reforms to make some to help with the frequent challenging housing situation we have with the city and the livability here. And want to say I myself went through a period of challenge of finding housing due to some strict screening regimens and a lot of the multifamily buildings. And I was once party to an eviction myself because my other housemates were not keeping up on the rent, even though I was consistent with paying on time, which was largely a spillover to excessively high heating bills due to the house that we were in. And so I, as a very new landlord, have brought on some tenants who would have gotten screened out for something similar due to the experience of what I had went through. And for many others, the ordinance will induce a lot of the screening managers to try to find out more about one's story rather than taking the previous arbitrary approach. And I concur about what was said previously about a stable home being important for rebuilding one's life rather than placing extra barriers for people who pose no threat. And with the security deposits, it's a way to make the finances more inclusive by shaving off the upfront costs. So it's in the spirit of inclusive financing there. And that was the extent of the comments. Thank you for the process.
Thank you very much. Is Michael here? Michael?
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Dahl.
Either one will work. Yeah.
Moving over there. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Dahl, and I'm the Public Policy Director with Homeline. It's a statewide tenant advocacy organization. Our core program, a tenant hotline, advised over 3,000 Minneapolis renter households each year regarding their rights related to securing, maintaining, and living in rental housing. I want to thank Councilmember Ellison and Council President Bender for their leadership in the crafting and public engagement process around this Renters Protection Ordinance. Homeline sees this ordinance as a good first step in a balance of interests between tenants and landlords when it comes to addressing housing inequities in Minneapolis. We look forward to continued work with the city to improve the local tenant-landlord law. That said, I'd like to comment on one section in particular, the proposal regarding eviction lookbacks, which are a huge step forward. As the council is aware, due to recent studies of evictions in Minneapolis, evictions are disproportionately harming certain neighborhoods and communities of color. Currently, the mere filing of an eviction action by a landlord instantly stains a household's rental history indefinitely. An eviction may be on someone's record from several years ago, and still it haunts the family, making it nearly impossible for them to find a home in the future. Or there may be an agreeable settlement between a tenant and a landlord. The case may have been dismissed. There may even be cases where the tenant prevails, and yet it's up to the tenant to go to get the record expunged, which is never guaranteed. Homeline, backed by a statewide coalition of organizations, including the city of Minneapolis, brought reform eviction expungement on a statewide level, and it passed this past legislative session. Corrective measures similar to what is in this proposal passed the Minnesota House of Representatives. Unfortunately, it stalled in the state Senate. Thus, I want to say that Minneapolis has a chance to lead the state and set an example on an issue that has substantial statewide support. Also, this ordinance will work in tandem with a commitment made by the city's strategic and racial equity plan. The city's strategic housing goals aims to reduce involuntary displacement of rental housing for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. While this will take additional work to accomplish, passing this proposed ordinance will have a tremendous impact for the tenants who have already experienced eviction and continue to face barriers. The proposed measures in this ordinance, the limited look-back periods for evictions up to 3 years, as well as prohibiting denials of rent based on evictions that were dismissed or resulted in the judgment for the renter, will have a significant impact on families throughout the city by expanding fair, equitable, and access to housing in all wards. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of the Renters Protection Ordinance. We urge the committee and the full council to enact the ordinance.
Thank you. Next up is Ariana Feldman, and then Charlene Harper and Jen Yang.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ariana Feldman. I am a organizer with Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, United Renters for Justice, and I am also a renter in the Powderhorn neighborhood of South Minneapolis. I'm here today to strongly support the renter protection ordinances in front of you. During my time working with Inquilinos Unidos, I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of tenants, and so I've seen frequently every day just how needed these renter protections and much more is needed in our city. I want to take a moment to share the story of one of our members from our organization who asked not to be named but still has a very powerful story. She was charged with a felony many years ago, arguably because of racial profiling and the profoundly racist criminal justice system that we live in. After that, she lost her home and wasn't able to find another place to live because of her criminal record. Fast forward, it's now been 2 years that she has been homeless in and out of homeless shelters without a place to live. During this time, she's also been diagnosed with cancer and is racking up medical debt, making it even harder to be able to afford housing. I want to live in a city where everyone has access to safe and affordable housing. This is not the city that we want to live in. So with that in mind, I think these ordinances are the great first step towards making Minneapolis a city where people's needs are met before the greed and abuse of landlords as it stands right now in the city. I think the Minneapolis City Council has a great opportunity to be able to provide more protections for your constituents and to be able to make this city more people-centered instead instead of profit-centered. I look forward to working with you on many more renter protections to make the city more accessible and affordable, like rent control, like tenant opportunity to purchase, and the many more ways that renters can build power in our city. Thank you for this time, and thank you for taking the time to host this hearing, and I really hope that you will pass the renter protections in front of you.
Thank you very much. Charlene Harper.
Hi, I'm Charlene, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the tenants, the renters tenants, and I have a issue and a problem when I see senior citizens and disabled people on the streets of Minneapolis who had so-called affordable housing, and I would like someone to advocate and explain affordable housing, because a lot of people who think of affordable housing thinking of that they can afford to live in a house, that they can afford to live in an apartment, but there are no one explaining it to them of the Affordability Act, because they're thinking that there are places they can afford it. There are people who have mental illness, those who can't afford to live where they're living at, that the landlords are not showing them the blueprint or the fine print of their application. They're thinking that they're getting what they're paying for, but then they end up living in the slum area thinking that they're living right, and then they end up on the streets. So I have a problem with, I see someone on the streets, especially as someone 70 and older who've been put out the streets because they can't afford to live, because they lost their job or whatever. So I have an issue with that in the state of Minnesota, because this place or this state saying that they afford renters for people, but yet and still when we move in or when we stay where we're supposed to be staying, if we $1 over or 50 cents over the rent being raised, then we have an issue with trying to find a place of affordability when we were staying was best for us, but then we made $1 over, now we have to move. So the Affordable Act, I wish someone explained that to people who don't understand the Affordable Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Jen here?
Oh, that's me.
Welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me? My name is Jen. I am an organizer with Inquilinos Unidos, and before I was president of the city, a former Minneapolis renter. I am here in support of the passing of these two renter ordinances. To be really frank with you, I believe that not passing them would be an act of compliant racism. Black and brown folks are systemically disadvantaged, and it's because of the lack of legal protections such as these. These laws would reduce only a fraction of the many barriers that all poor, working class people of color face when it comes to finding safe and dignified housing. This is the bare minimum of what we should be doing for renters, and especially renters of color. We need these protections, and I urge you to do more for renters moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Jake here, and followed by Amy and then Leroy?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jake Verdon. I'm at 2401 Chicago Avenue South. I'm an organizer on the Parks and Power campaign, and I'm also a renter. I just want to speak in strong support of the ordinances and appreciate that we're getting the ball moving. I'm a first-generation college student, or college graduate, I should say. I got a lot of student loan debt, and even with my privilege, it's really hard for me to find a place to rent. I'm often getting completely just cut out of the conversation right away or charged an extra security deposit. I'm cost-burdened with my housing. All the young people in my life, I'm talking about my brother's friends who are 25 and younger, every single one of them is on some degree of homelessness. It's a real crisis. So I appreciate, and I want to just echo what other folks are saying, that this feels like a first step. If we don't follow up with real rent control, right to purchase, then these ordinances are kind of for naught. We need an ecosystem that's really about renter power so that we can build some security. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the last two speakers who were able to keep their comments down to a minute. We still have a lot of people who would like to speak, and I know we have some needs on the committee to maybe get to something else after this. So welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Smith, and I live in North Minneapolis on 33rd and DuPont, so we are acquainted. And I'm also a landlord, but I'm not a huge landlord. I'm a really small one. I have 6 units and 6 tenants. And I have daycare workers, and I have bus drivers, and I have florists who are making $12 to $15 an hour. And they can afford the $800 a month rent that I'm offering today. But the way I'm offering rent today does not cover my costs. And I have found myself in debt many a time. And so I've had to slowly increase my rents in order to cover the base cost. I've also had tenants who weren't great. And when that's happened, it's cost me $10,000 to $15,000 to get rid of them. I know it seems like a huge amount of money, but it's way more than just the rent that's lost. It's the legal fees, it's going through the legal system, it's being in an unsafe house and not being able to fulfill all of the other apartments that are then empty, because I'm not going to put someone in an unsafe situation. I won't do that. So the costs add up. Right now, I am net zero. So if I have a $10,000 to $15,000 expense, the only place I can put it is in rent, and I only have 6 tenants. So that daycare worker, that florist, that bus driver, their rent is going to go up $150 to $200 a month just to cover it. I have not made any profit in the 6 years that I've been a landlord, and I care very deeply about the people who live in my properties. I live in one too. I live in a $35,000 house that was a piece of crap when I bought it. I bought 3 properties that the city was struggling with. I bought drug houses. I bought places that had been vacant and were full of mold. And I fixed them up myself because as a woman who's paid 20% less than men, I can't afford to hire that work out. I really care about the renters in this city, and I can recognize that there are probably thousands of people who are not getting housing today who need it. The problem is there are some who are still difficult to house, and there's no way to differentiate, and that's what I'm truly asking for you to do. Not that I don't want this passed. I want it revised so that there's some way that we can differentiate. And if something comes up and we get that bad tenant and there's $10,000 to $15,000 worth of damage, how do we stay in business? If we assume that there is little risk here, and I hope that you're right that there is little risk, there is still some risk, and I would ask the city to use the resources of the entire city, not an individual landlord, but the entire city to cover that risk. Put up a bond for those mitigation funds so that small landlords can stay in business. Because if I can't stay in business and I sell my buildings, it's going to be a national company who buys them, and they are going to jack up the rent, and my tenants are going to be out. My other concern is about the way that it's impacting different renters. We have tons and tons of landlords with tons and tons of units, and they're $3,000 a month. And we continue to build those buildings. Representative Ellison, you had a housing meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I heard over and over people saying, we don't need granite, we need affordable housing. I'm asking you to build affordable housing and to protect those who are providing it. Thank you.
We have Leroy Marshall and Joe Abraham and Margaret Kaplan. Is Leroy here? Is Joe here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And I just want to let you know that I know you're in a very difficult situation with where our city is. So I just want to let you know, even if I don't agree with everyone, I appreciate what you're doing.
Could you give us your name for the record so we know?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Joe Abraham.
Thank you.
So just to finish that thought, so thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration of these things. My name is Joe Abraham. I own and manage, it's a private company, Pergola Management. We have 750 market rate apartments, house over 1,500 people. Our focus is on naturally occurring affordable housing. We accept Section 8. We have many people with challenging histories. And I'm here today to speak in opposition to this as it stands right now. Okay, and you know, the frustrating part is I'm sitting here and I'm hearing so many people and I'm nodding and I'm agreeing with so many of the things that I hear as it relates to the problem. And I think so many of the people here, whether they're speaking for this or opposed to this, have the same outlook. We all agree we want to eliminate, predatory practices. We all agree we want to produce more. We all agree that we want to preserve what we have, and we want to find ways to provide more access for the most challenged renters. The reason I think we're here is because of so many of these terrible stories that we're hearing. It's terrible to hear some of the stories of this gentleman and so many of the people in the room, and I think those stories resonate with us as human beings, as members of the community. My problem with this is that I just don't think we have enough information. I just don't think we have enough data. I want to understand what's the scope of this problem and what are the effects of some of the things that we're deciding. There's many parts of this that I think are good, but there's many that I think are a real problem. Many of you may know that the Family Housing Fund has commissioned a study with the Wilder Foundation to do a market rate study on every aspect of people's history, their financial history, their criminal history, and their rental history, and what impact that has on their ability to be a good renter. I've been asked to participate, and they're gathering data from many of the operators in town directly from the screening companies, and they're going to process that data and hopefully be able to tell, is this renter going to be, is this going to provide and keep housing safe and affordable? I'd ask that you put this on hold. That's one of a couple different things that are going on. Put this on hold until we have more of that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Margaret Kaplan here? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Margaret Kaplan, and I'm the president of the Housing Justice Center. We're a nonprofit public interest organization that does legal and policy advocacy to promote the preservation and production of affordable housing and the protection of the rights of folks who live there. We're here to speak very strongly in support of the action that the City Council is considering because we believe that people can no longer wait for housing opportunities. We cannot exist as a city where people can be permanently unhousable. We believe that access to housing opportunities is fundamentally a fairness issue and particularly a fair housing issue. And we're really concerned with this narrative that paints folks who have had challenges accessing safe, stable, and affordable housing as somehow a danger to our communities. These are our community members, and we need to make sure that housing opportunities exist for them. We can no longer replicate the inequities that exist in our criminal justice system and in our economy, in our housing system. And you kind of see that playing out when people are talking up here. There are people who are certainly benefiting by the status quo, but particularly low-income households, households of color, and people who have barriers, disproportionately households of color. We also believe that the current system is serving to exclude households of color from areas of our city that have existed as predominantly white areas. And these ordinances can help address that concern and this access to fair housing. We also believe that these ordinances walking together is very important. So, one cannot work without the other. And we appreciate the city's commitment from staff to having an engaged process for implementation. We do have some concerns about the individualized assessment, for example, but we believe the process between adoption and implementation is a time where we can work out how to make these ordinances work the best for everybody concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is Joey Dobson here? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Gordon, Council President, and Council members. My name is Joey Dobson. I'm a housing attorney with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. I'm also a co-chair of the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing, and today I'm here on the committee's behalf. The Advisory Committee on Housing has a diverse membership with landlords, renters, and representatives from a number of groups and organizations involved in housing work here in Minneapolis. The committee has had the opportunity to thoroughly discuss and consider the ordinance proposed. We discussed an early draft at our June meeting with staff from Council President Bender and Councilmember Ellison's offices present. Our committee then generated specific feedback at our July meeting, which was provided to the authors and to City Council. At our August meeting, we decided to schedule a special meeting to take a position on this ordinance. That meeting was held on August 20th. 13 of our 21 members were in attendance, including both landlords and tenants, as well as representatives from St. Stephen's, from NCCD, the Alliance, Minneapolis Public Schools, CURA, MHA, the Bridge for Youth, and Legal Aid. The committee voted 12-1 to support this ordinance. The committee overwhelmingly supports the spirit and the intent of this ordinance and views the measure as a relatively minor step toward addressing the broader housing issues that our city faces. The committee does have questions and concerns about enforcement and implementation of the ordinance should it pass. We hope that the City Council and the Department of Regulatory Services will continue to engage with our committee as these plans develop. A memo including both the majority's position and a minority opinion from our committee have been presented to this committee and for the public record. Thank you all for your time and for your work to address the critical housing issues in our city.
Thank you very much. And next, there's Bailey, Ellen, and Luke. Is Bailey here? Ellen, perhaps you'd like to go next?
Thank you. For the record, I'm Ellen Solly. I'm president of the Family Housing Fund. At the Family Housing Fund, we recognize that the intent behind the proposed ordinance is to expand opportunities for the most vulnerable renters in our community. We applaud and share that goal. One of our strategic priorities is to expand access to housing for families throughout the region, and this includes initiatives to reduce evictions, improve the quality of low-cost housing, increase access to housing for individuals with rental subsidies. And one of the key components is a work around tenant screening and some work that we're doing over the past year with a collaborative effort with tenant advocates and private housing providers to identify and garner broad acceptance of more nuanced screening criteria that opens doors for families. In short, we are partners with you and invested in the same kinds of outcomes that this ordinance seeks to achieve. The Family Housing Fund is in a unique position to provide comments on the proposed ordinance. We're not an owner of rental property, nor are we a tenant-based or community-based organization. But we are working with many of those and with you to improve access and affordability across the entire housing sector. And we value everyone working on housing solutions, the community, property owners, tenants, and government. No one has all the answers, and we all have a role to play in getting to them. I shared my perspective on the earlier draft of the proposal and want to thank the sponsors for incorporating some suggestions. And I see three potential issues remaining in the draft before you. First, while this proposal is a bold step, we don't know if this policy change will achieve its objective to improving access for tenants. Additionally, we are working to determine if there are better predictors of success other than the ones that are currently used in the marketplace today. As drafted, the proposed ordinance does not account for new information or data or evolving conditions as they emerge as this ordinance is fully realized. Second, as you have heard today, there are divergent opinions about this ordinance. There are some that believe that this isn't necessary, some that think it doesn't go far enough, and some wonder if it's even appropriate. I am concerned that these divergent opinions will negatively impact implementation if this passes. How can we come together to recognize the important and various perspectives on this issue in order to get to the goal of access to quality rental housing that I believe property owners and tenants share? And finally, I'm concerned that the enforcement of the violations, enforcement for violations of this ordinance could result in tenant displacement, and it would be counter to the intent of this ordinance. So I hope that any proposed penalty isn't unfairly borne by tenants alone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to appear in front of you today.
Thank you very much. Next is Luke, followed by Steve, and then Cecilia. Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Luke Redman. I'm a managing attorney of the housing unit at Legal Aid. As I think you know, Legal Aid represents tenants who face eviction. We do other things as well. That's what I do. It's what my colleagues do. We try to help people get better, healthier, quality homes, as I know that's something that the city cares about. I speak here on behalf of these ordinances. I think that the city ought to pass them. I think they are a first step. There's certainly more that can be done, and there may be even some more things that could change about the ordinances themselves. But I do commend the committee, Councilmember Ellison, Council President Bender, for bringing these up, for saying that this is at least a good first step for people. We know evictions pretty well at Legal Aid. That's what I know best. And what I can tell you about evictions is they are not an accurate representation about how good a person would be as a tenant. People who are evicted because their landlords have made a profit model of eviction. There are landlords, not all of them, certainly some very good landlords are in the room, and some have spoken today, but there are landlords in this city who have figured out how to evict as many people as possible because they can generate profit from doing so. If they charge a double or a triple deposit, it actually earns them money to evict as many as they can. And the data does show it. This city commissioned a report by its innovation team 2 years ago. There are a group of landlords who file more evictions than total units that they have. It's those landlords that I think that this ordinance can drive a stake into the heart of, so that we can help tenants have quality housing regardless of what community they live in and what the color of their skin is. The eviction crisis disproportionately affects people of color. 90% of folks who go through housing court are people of color, largely African American, Hispanic. It's those folks that this ordinance would help. And for the landlords who say, we need good screening practices, because the landlords in the room who've said that, those screening practices are driving folks into the arms of the predatory landlords who are out there. By saying to someone, I won't give you housing because I don't think you're a quality tenant, but it's based on an eviction history that was put there because of the predatory practices of other landlords, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Members of the committee, I do think there are some things that could change. The landlords have pointed out, some of the testifiers have pointed out that that some of the criminal screening practices are complicated. I'm a fan of simplicity. I think simple is better. I think that we should get rid of the 10-year look-back period. I think that there is no need to look that far back at a person's record. A person changes dramatically in the course of 10 years. So I think that if one thing, as the work on these ordinances continue, we could look at even adopting a more fair look-back period for tenants. And members of the committee, the last thing I think has been misstated. No one is telling landlords you have to rent to people. All they are saying is treat them like people, not as data points. Sit down with them, look them in the eye before you deny them housing. Thank you.
So the chair had to step away for a second, so I will act as chair right now. So we have Steve Taylor. Steve, he's still here. Man, I really cannot read this cursive.
Cecilia?
Is it Cecilia? Somebody who lives Newton Avenue North? I apologize. It's very beautiful, but it's not legible.
Good afternoon, council members. Councilman Allison. I'm in your ward, so you saw that, though. Okay, I came here today with Take Action Minnesota, and I'm not quite sure about this bill. From what I've heard today, I do get a little bit of it, but yeah, I was going to say something else. But from what I heard today, there was a man earlier, and he spoke about people that have multiple felonies and how what I got out of it is that they should not be able to get a place to stay because they might not be stable. I'm one of those people, and I never was evicted. I always paid my rent, and actually all my landlords thought I was a very good tenant. When you're renting to somebody, whether they have criminal history or whether they don't have criminal history, you don't know anything about a person that doesn't have criminal history. You don't know who's in your house because maybe they just didn't get caught. People make mistakes. We've made mistakes, and it's not necessary for someone to pay for their mistakes 10 and 15 years later. Fortunately, my last mistake, I got a landlord and he gave me a chance. I stayed in his house for $54,000. That was 54 months. And after that, I bought my own house. So like I said, I don't know the whole thing about the bill, but the background check, how long does the person keep paying for whatever they did? Because a lot of people don't go to prison. They're still out here. They may be on probation, parole, and that everybody deserves a chance. We all need to be treated like we're humans. We need to have a chance to have a place to stay. We need to be able to feed our kids. we need to be able to do things. Like I said, my last mistake, I got a job. I worked my job for 6 years. I started my own business. I work with people that have criminal history, or I call it legal history because everybody has it, but everybody needs to have somewhere to lay their head at night. And with a person being able to get that basic need of shelter, that probably will lower the recidivism rate. And like the guy previously said, we're not telling you to rent to people. You can do what you want to do with your property. But a person with criminal history still going to spend their money just like somebody else and probably won't have any evictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Leanna, and then Russ, and then Marjan.
Good afternoon. My name is Leanna Stefaniak. I'm an attorney and real estate professional working in the multifamily industry for the last 15 years. I represent a management company that has over 1,000 units in the city of Minneapolis. Respectfully, we're here to make sense of an ordinance that, regardless of good intentions, will create more problems than it will solve. The city's well-intended goal and concern has been regarding the lack of affordable housing, and I think everyone in this room agrees that that's a problem we can all work together on to solve. However, this ordinance does nothing to address housing supply or affordability, and in fact will intensify those problems in more ways than one. This ordinance, even in its revised form, is overly broad, vague, provides no mechanism for proper enforcement, and potentially violates due process rights of private owners in the city. This ordinance is one driven by anecdotes, and while they're compelling, it's not the basis for regulation of private interests. We have no data to support the ordinance, so there's been no consideration of relevant facts. The ordinance is overly burdensome and unworkable. Complying with this ordinance, particularly the screening component, places an unreasonable burden on landlords and rental property owners. Given the subjective requirements and abnormal exceptions, rental property owners of all sizes will spend thousands of dollars trying to find ways to comply, whether that's through attorney's fees to give advice on how to adhere to the ordinance, specialized training, or additional legal fees defending themselves against claims made in bad faith. All of this comes at the expense of the property, which can impact tenants in the forms of rent increases, but also cause an owner to default on its loan covenants if the property no longer meets financial performance tests due to increased expenses, increased turnover or vacancy, or damage to the property. For example, how is a landlord supposed to guarantee consistent analysis with regard to the income provision? What demonstrates a history of successful rent payments? Is there a delta threshold? Under this provision, a tenant who lived in a previous building that didn't meet the income requirements but paid $500 in rent can now apply at a building that's now the rent is $800 and can bypass the income requirement because they have a history of paying a much lower rent. How do I know that the tenant can fill that gap? And if they can't, we're in evictions. And then now the tenant has an eviction record and as a problem going forward because this ordinance created a financial loophole to allow them to live in a property that they can't afford. Lessons not learned from the housing crisis. The city does not have resources to enforce the kind of unrelated provisions of the ordinance. We all agree that there are bad actors within the city, and we currently have existing ordinances and tools to go after them, but the city can't get it done. But now with this ordinance, you've essentially codified those bad behaviors and looped the rest of us in with them. Finally, providing an opportunity for a landlord to do an individualized assessment is quite frankly a trap and exposes them to fair housing challenges. Objective screening standards is often advised as the best practice against fair housing discrimination because it stops the landlord from relying on subjective opinion or personal judgment. Screening policies that are clear and standardized are key components to complying with fair housing and are also the best defenses in lawsuits where discrimination claims are made. This suggestion, the individualized assessment, allows for implicit or hidden biases to invade the approval process, helping no one and hurting everyone. It's unworkable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Russ Adams, followed by Marjan Starr, and then Cody Mathis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Russ Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. One of the questions that's before you is how can we expect someone to transition back into being a productive member of our society if we deny them a stable place to call home in our community? The Alliance supports the proposed tenant screening and protection ordinance. I think from the testimony today, it's pretty clear that there is an imbalance of power when it comes to the housing market, and that it's your task today to figure out how to strike the right balance. It's your task today to weigh the facts and interests and anticipate the possibilities. Some of the testimony you've heard today has focused mostly on the negative change of what might happen if we pass modest and reasonable limits on screening look-back practices and security deposits. I want to invite you to think about the many people and families whose lives will be stabilized by your decisions today. Let's focus on them. We've heard that you should wait until there's more studies and data. I think the city staff has done an outstanding job of collecting factual information and disaggregating the available data already. They've done a tremendously outstanding job. And so have you, as you've started to look at packaging together a bundle of housing strategies that will preserve, produce, and protect tenants. Now, reasonable people can disagree on studies and data, but I'd like to suggest you've just collected a lot of data this afternoon. If you had attended the tenants' rights rallies in the past couple of years, you would have seen all the data points you need to pass this ordinance. There were numerous life stories told at these rallies of actual renters whose lives would be impacted in a positive way if you did the right thing today. They're not anecdotes, they're real people. If anything, this proposal probably doesn't go far enough. The studies that the cities have referenced demonstrate the low rate of recidivism after 5 years of rejoining society, let alone 7 years, let alone 10 years. In fact, 10 years is probably too punitive. It feels arbitrary. I would encourage you to consider how you might drop the look-back period to 7 years for some of the mistakes that individuals have made. And we've heard a number of people own up to mistakes. We're all flawed human beings, and everybody deserves a second chance. So 7 years is already probably excessively long period of time. It creates tremendous hardship and difficulty as it is for people who have paid their debt to society and who would make great neighbors and responsible renters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marjan here? Is Cody here?
Hello, my name is Cody Mathis, and I'm actually part of the working homeless community in Minneapolis. And I stumbled across a friend of mine at this event, and I'm on the side of the renters and the poor and the hardworking and the homeless. And I highly encourage you all to pass these ordinances, and if there are any revisions that need to be made or necessary, so be it, but we first need to try and put these and implement these. It will make a better Minneapolis. And for the landlords, y'all need to lay aside y'all classism, racism, and greed that y'all have been taking advantage of, these isms that y'all have taken advantage of to make you all a profit. Now, for the homelessness situation in this city, it is getting worse. I'm homeless, and I know it doesn't look like it. I don't look like the typical average homeless person you see going to a Twins game or a Vikings game, but it's getting worse. You're seeing more people out on the streets, living in their cars, and this. And when this recession hits, I'm hoping that it doesn't, but more than likely it is. The landlords have another problem on their hands, and that's going to be more homeless people, maybe quote unquote, not even gonna say invading their properties, but they're spreading throughout the suburbs, even as of now. It's increasing, and for the landlords, I have a few things. I encourage you all to find solutions. If there's any grievances you have with these ordinances, have some solutions available to relay to the public and to the renters. I would encourage also to take the risk of adopting these ordinances, and you all are businessmen and businesswomen, and if you all don't like the risk, then you should find another profession and not be a landlord, work at McDonald's, Walmart, or something like that. And then finally, the golden rule, some of them are probably claiming to be Christians, and I would suggest that they follow the golden rule that says, do unto others as you will have them do unto you. If you was a renter, I'm pretty sure you would like these ordinances to be in place and have a start to have justice for yourself. And again, I highly encourage the chair to pass these ordinances. It will make a better lifestyle for people living here in Minneapolis, and these landlords won't have to deal with homeless people on their properties or so on. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Andrew Falstrom, Jordan Moorhead, and Joanna Osman.
Good afternoon. Thanks for staying. My name is Andrew Falstrom. I work with Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia. You're here considering who is worthy of housing in this city, right? I think that what we see day in and day out are people who say that there are certain people that do not belong in the city of Minneapolis. And if we can just codify what fits and what doesn't fit, we can get out the bad elements. The purpose of housing is to house people, right? So when landlords come in and are trying to change that, we have problems. I'm going to jump into something else, though. I wanted to respond to our compañera Ellen from the Family Housing Fund. There are divergent opinions in this room, and I think you've all heard them, right? And we can't pretend that those divergent opinions have the same power in this space and have had it historically. We've heard from people who have had the resources and the background to buy up more housing than they need, than they can actually personally use, right? We have heard from Bernadette Horning, whose company owns at least $128 million of property in the city, from Joe Abraham, $22 million, Cecil Smith, $5 million. I see Mike Garvin outside, $19 million. We have heard from people who have directly benefited from the housing crisis in this city. That's a lot of property, and these are millionaires, right? And then we've also heard from people who are at their mercy, for people who have to find places to live, something that their families actually need day in and day out. And they're not only at the mercy of landlords that have been benefiting from the system, but they're at the mercy of the system itself. And that's where you come in, right? Because you're gatekeepers to that system. And so, yes, there are divergent opinions, and it has to be very clear where the city of Minneapolis stands, what group of people they're going to support. And to the smaller landlords in the room that we've heard from, I feel for you. I'm so thankful for the housing that you provide, and the solution cannot be to align with the millionaire landlords who have taken so much from our communities, right? So I'm here to say, of course, pass these ordinances. These are the bare minimum, and I echo Takara's sadness that this is what we're at. These are the bare minimum, and it is wild to see the cartoonish response from the Multi-Housing Association to two small ordinances, right? We need you to pass these things, and we need you to stand up and do so much more. We need to see public housing defended in the city of Minneapolis. We need to see systems of community ownership that take these multi-million-dollar landlords out of the equation. We need to see these renter protections and so much stronger, and we need to see rent control, and I will be happy to live in that city with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jordan, and then Johanna, and then Michelle. And if people are interested in passing, that's just fine at this point. I think we've heard a lot of different voices. I don't see any of them stepping forward. Is Julie here? Julie Gliosi? Corina Becker or Bowler? Callie Brown? If somebody wants to go look for her, if somebody walks in, we can do that too. Is Asher here right now and would like to speak? Alan Arthur? Barbara Geneth? Or Janetta, sorry.
It's all right. Hello, I'm Barb Janetta. I'm the Director of Alliance Housing, and I'm a resident of Minneapolis in Ward 8. Thank you for your research, the time you've put into these ordinances, and your initiative in taking them up today. Alliance, for its 30-year history, has managed its affordable housing portfolio with much less screening than's proposed by your look-back ordinance today. And we do that mostly without any supportive services. Our vacancy rates, our lost rent or damages rival or best most in the industry. So we don't find our properties are chaos or our tenants are problems. All of our properties are Tier 1. Our neighbors will affirm our properties are some of the best on the block. And if things come up, they do with all of us, we take care of them right off the bat. With the low vacancy rates in this town right now, in rental housing and the rising rents, low-wage workers can't catch a break. Management is about managing issues in your housing, not screening people out to keep properties safe. People are being denied for things they did 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They've totally changed around their life, and they're being judged for the worst day in their life. It just really makes no sense. Everybody does better with stable and affordable housing. It's necessary to hold down a job, get your kids to school, and take care of your well-being. Our tenants are living proof of that every day. If the private market won't adopt reasonable screening practices, I applaud the city for intervening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that Corina is here now, and you'd like to speak. And then, I got your name wrong.
You so chopped it up.
Well, you better correct it for me.
I just want to show this. Hey, everybody.
Why don't you give us your correct name for our record?
I know, but y'all always chop my name up. So, but thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody. Residents, thank you. So, I don't know what to say because I'm always talking. But I do want to say that housing, what's going on right now, is causing traumatic stress. As you saw, the young lady who was here a little bit ago, is causing traumatic stress. And we don't know what else more to do. So for me, I'm a resident. I've lived downtown for almost 21 years. And I've had all my kids in the house, and I've seen housing go down, and we're trying to fix it. We don't know what more we can do. Landlords are some of them are the worst. I'm experiencing the worst. We have to figure out how we can make it better because it is causing residents traumatic stress. The displacement part is affecting families through the roof. The eviction numbers are through the roof. The numbers speak for itself. The shelters are overcrowded. We don't need to table this ordinance at all. The numbers speak for itself. Families are living in cars, like they said, like all the stories everybody talked about. I've already mentioned all this stuff. But we got to figure out how to help the traumatic part. It's causing residents traumatic stress, and that's what nobody's understanding. Also, it's also causing issues with the children that's being displaced. That comes with joining gangs, teen pregnancy, prostitution, all types of stuff. But we need some resources to help with the traumatic things that's happening to the families and the children. I want to invite, can I invite somebody up?
Well,
it just be really quick.
If you want to give them some of your 3 minutes, that would be fine.
Ivory, please, can you come up? So Ivory is my organizer for our tenant association. And that was the whole reason why we needed a tenant association, because we have management issues and landlord issues. And she's been our biggest supporter. Homeland has done amazing things to help us get organized, and so Kira, our neighborhood association, and so it's really traumatic, and I want this ordinance to pass, and it does not need to be tabled. It does not need to be tabled. The data speaks for itself. And so I want you to just help me with this, because you know I don't like speaking.
We actually got to hear from Ivory a little while ago.
But
yeah. Well, I would just say that the tenants at Madison Apartments downtown, where she represents, have fought for over a year and beyond to really improve their housing conditions and need protections like this in place.
Yes, they're so needed. So I say don't table it, because the numbers does speak for itself. The data speaks for itself.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is Mike Garvin here? And there's also Karen Peterson and Joe Hessla. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Garvin. I'm Vice President of T.E. Miller Development. We are creators and providers of housing in the Twin Cities. At the outset of the discussion of the ordinances, I said Minneapolis is a special place for us. We are proud to be a part of this community. We're proud to provide everyone a place to call home. We hear a lot about the low vacancy rate and lack of availability in Minneapolis. Those problems aren't fixed with untested laws. They're fixed by more production of a diverse stock of housing options. The housing shortage facing our region over the next 2 decades is sobering. According to Family Housing Fund data, we need almost 180,000 new housing units to keep up with growth and economic development over the next 20 years. We're underproducing by 3,500 units right now. People with decades of experience in financing, building multifamily housing developments have warned this ordinance will make the housing shortage much worse. If we lose even a little production, we lose housing opportunities, our region loses jobs, and people searching for stability lose economic opportunity. The proposal also includes penalties for what could be minor or non-existent infractions that could cause renter displacement. Without regard for livability or quality of housing, housing providers could lose their license for a single violation at the property. I urge you to step back, start over on an ordinance that helps, and work cooperatively to achieve our shared goal of safe and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is it Karen? Karen? Close.
Good afternoon, Chairman Cunningham, board members. My name is Karen Peterson. I'm a lifelong renter and a member of Stonehouse Square Tenants Association, which Ivory also helped us immensely. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today in support of the ordinance, in support of basic common sense and much needed renter protections. As rents continue to soar in Minneapolis, and as Minneapolis becomes a primary renter city, we need to do all we can to level the playing field, especially for those on the periphery, those who have faced struggles but need a chance to turn their lives around. How can we hope to reduce recidivism if we do not allow safe, affordable housing for those who have served their time, especially for nonviolent felonies? How can we expect the engine that drives the city of Minneapolis, the baristas, the Target workers, the people who sweep the streets, how can we expect them to continue if they are driven further and further from the city in the search of affordable, safe, affordable housing? It's, especially for those who may have had one of those earlier missteps. A reasonable, meaning not excessive, damage deposit is one small step in the right direction. Giving people a second chance in life is not only humane, it's a quintessential Minnesota-Minneapolis ethos. We welcome refugees and immigrants from all over the world, yet often our neighbors across town are unwelcome. This is wrong. You can begin to shift this needle with these ordinances. You can leave your mark on the city of Minneapolis, leaving it more acceptable and more equitable. You have that power. Please use it. Use this opportunity to show that Minneapolis cares. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of these renter protections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joe Hessla, followed by Abdisnasir.
My name is Joe Hessla. I live in the 9th Ward and I own a house. City Council, it is your job to protect Minneapolis residents and make Minneapolis affordable, fair, and livable for everyone. We're here today because the housing market needs regulation. At this time, landlords can require a security deposit of up to 2 times the monthly rent. So if your rent is $1,000 to move into your new home, you would need $3,000. People don't have that kind of money. Background checks. When someone has served their time, they should be done. When people exit prison, they need a helping hand and not a permanent stain on their record. Right now, our policy is ex-prisoners need not apply. As a society, we need to do absolutely everything we can to welcome these citizens into our city. What we're doing now is making it harder for them to have a happy, secure, healthy life. Poor people often don't have good credit ratings as a direct consequence of being poor in the first place. And it looks to me like landlords just don't want to rent to poor people. So they require a good credit rating. Poor people start with a disadvantage, and then their credit rating punishes them even further. It reminds me of the poll tax. People were poor so they couldn't afford to vote. Now they're poor and they can't find a place to live. How would you like it if your family member faced this brutal reality? In truth, we're not asking that much with these 2 ordinances, and you may see us back here again for citywide rent control, controlling runaway gentrification and out-of-town investors buying up our housing stock. You were elected in a progressive wave, and this is part of that wave.
Thank you very much. Is Kadir Abdunasir here? I think I said that maybe close to what, how you say it? I don't know.
Yeah,
Well, no.
Abdunasir, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
Stephanie Brown will be next then.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I think we need to look at this issue in a big picture. You know, I'm using the information of the book by Matthew Desmond on evicted. So it says that America is the richest democracy with the worst poverty. So he looked on the issue of evictions in Milwaukee and how evictions lead to depression, mental health problems, lack of job, loss of jobs, and all of that. According to the USA, the magazine, it says that Minneapolis is on the list of one of the worst housing issues for the African American community. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington metro area is one of several Midwestern cities that enacted restrictive housing covenants and exclusionary zoning policies in the 20th century. These policies still impact residential patterns today. So this issue is affecting the communities right now that were enacted 20 centuries ago. So I think we need to provide protections for the most vulnerable members of our community. Poverty should not be penalized because of, and there are some people that profit from the loss, from the disadvantage of others. So Milwaukee and Minneapolis have a lot of common when it comes to segregation and housing pressures. Both cities routinely rank in the top of all lists of U.S. cities with the largest gaps between the white and black citizens, and the lack of stable housing is a big reason for that disparity, according to Minneapolis Post. So I wish you the best, and really we need to provide protections for the most vulnerable members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm getting some concerned committee members about how they're going to have to leave for another appointment. So if people feel like they can go without speaking, that would be great. I think we have about 5 people. Somebody came back who was gone, who still yet want to speak. So keep it as brief as you can. We'd appreciate it. And maybe passing, that would be great if we could all be here to take the vote.
Excellent.
What's your name?
My name is Stephanie Brown.
Okay.
I'm the chair of the Housing Issues Committee in Whittier. Whittier neighborhood is in Ward 10, and we recently held a couple different public meetings on this issue and voted unanimously in support of the ordinances. So I want to communicate that on behalf of Whittier. You know, we have all the signs in the neighborhood, the safe and affordable signs. For us, we believe that a safe neighborhood is one where everyone can find a place to live, and an affordable neighborhood is one where you don't have to pay 10% of your salary to just get in the door. And so we ask you to support these ordinances, and I will leave it there so you can vote.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Is Mark Jessert here and still wants to speak? How about Khalid Omar? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Omar. I'm with the Muslim Coalition of Isaiah. I'm also a student and a young professional who's affected by the crisis of housing. Our communities are left with the choice of shelter or food. Corporate greed has divided our communities and left us with no option but to leave our communities. I no longer want our communities to struggle with the basic necessity of life and not have enough funds to keep a roof over their head. So many that are affected are not here today. They're out there surviving. There's a lot of harm that has been done to our communities. We can no longer afford the condition of choosing food or shelter. We can no longer afford the condition of choosing food or shelter. I'm here today to be a voice for those and stand with them. So the question is, will you stand with them too? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Osman here?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wadia Osman. I am here on behalf of Isaiah, and I wanted to say that I am for the law that is being passed here because my family members got evicted from their houses because of the payments that they couldn't make. I would like to end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Kaylee Brown back, and would Kaylee like to speak?
Hi, sorry I missed you earlier. My name is Kaylee Brown. I am a Whittier resident at 2630 Pleasant Avenue, speaking today as the Executive Director for the Whittier Alliance Neighborhood Association at 10 East 25th Street in Ward 10. This year, Whittier Alliance adopted a strategic plan which set out a goal to, quote, protect and expand the variety of housing options in Whittier for people at every life stage and economic condition, unquote. Our Housing Issues Committee, as Stephanie Brown mentioned, as well as the full Whittier Alliance Board, discussed and debated the proposed ordinances in view of that goal, and they each unanimously endorsed these ordinances. We understand there may be some changes to the ordinance as details are worked out, but we hope that the changes do not detract from accomplishing this goal. Whittier is nearly 90% renters, many of whom are already facing pressures from increasing rents, development and economic pressures as well. It's unreasonable to expect people would be able to hand over the equivalent of 3 months' rent, likely before they've even gotten their last security deposit back. The average household income in our neighborhood is $37,000, and that doesn't leave space for a few $1,000s to pay out extra security deposits to compensate just for the perception of risk. Linking these two policies is critical to make sure we don't solve for one form of exclusion just to create another. Whittier set out a goal to protect and expand housing options. These ordinances do that, and we ask that you vote in support of them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The last person who signed in is Catherine Lindquist. Would Catherine like an opportunity to speak if you're here?
Thank you thank you so kindly for taking me at the last minute. So I just want to step up here briefly and say I am in support of the ordinances as well. I am a rental property owner. I have been for 30 years. I have had the same tenants for over 15 years, and they are both veterans. I am a white privileged person. I live in Ward 13. My property taxes are more than the rent that I collect because I believe in subsidizing and providing a safe and human community for the people who served in my country. I also do a lot of work volunteer for Isaiah, Take Action, Amicus, Civil Liberties, several organizations. I volunteer at St. Stephen's. So I am just grateful, and I'm also a registered nurse, and I'm exposed continuously to people who are underserved and underprivileged, and we need to help these people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the last person who signed in, so I'm prepared to close the public hearing unless there's some objection coming from the crowd here. I don't see any.
My name is Margie Pierce. I was at work until recently. I couldn't make it at 1:30. I'm a small-time landlord with a few properties throughout the different wards: Powderhorn Park, North Minneapolis, Ventura Village. And it's extremely distressing to, comprehend how stressful it already can be as a landlord. Not knowing if you're going to hit a month when nobody turns in those rent checks, as a private person whose pockets are not endlessly deep. I'll give you an example. So I have a tenant who moved in whose credit score is exactly 580. I sometimes will consider people who don't meet that ideal picture of 600 credit score, etc. It's a great tenant. They're nice people. We work together well. I try to work with them through financial difficulties and such. It is now the 28th of the month, and I still don't have a rent check from them. I literally, between now and the 2nd, have $99 to live on. Not every landlord makes huge margins on their rental properties, and we invest a great deal of our own money to buy them. I have taken Tier 3 and Tier 2 properties and converted them to Tier 1 properties. I have taken things that are mouse and rat infested and turned them into nice places for people to live. The concept that I would have less ability to have some ability to sleep at night regarding things like criminal background and credit score when I select my tenants, it makes me wonder if this business would be worthwhile for me, in all honesty, because stress is worth something too. If I sold my properties, chances are they would be sold to someone who cared a whole lot less about the tenants who live with them. So this is extremely distressing for people like me who take properties that are a dump and invest our own money and our own hours and our own sweat equity to make them better places and offer them for affordable prices. I offer 3-bedroom apartments in North Minneapolis for $1,250 a month. I offer houses in South Minneapolis, 3 bedrooms, for the effective rent price of about $550. That's very reasonable pricing. For me to be able to continue to do so, I need some assurance. I'm willing to be flexible, like I said, with tenants. I do often consider the big picture. But to limit my ability in a way that's vague, in particular, scares me. When things aren't hammered out, how I'm to make the assessment, most of the laws do not favor the landlord. And again, small-time people like me don't have infinite lawyers and pockets, and sleepless nights are already a thing that we experience. So please take that into consideration.
Thank you very much. Seeing no one else step forward, then I will close the public hearing. And I will turn to committee members to see if there's a motion or comments. Councilmember Goodman?
I'll defer to Councilmember Ellison first.
Oh, Councilmember Ellison.
I'll save my comments for maybe the full council meeting, as we have council members who have to get going. And I will move approval, knowing that some of my colleagues have a few things to say and have a few changes that they will want to propose. So,
thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really want to briefly thank Councilmember Ellison for his leadership on this ordinance as the lead author. And, we've been working together on this for the last couple of years, year and a half. But the work really has its origins in the eviction study, the groundbreaking work done by Dr. Matthew Desmond, who was here earlier, that our staff learned from and helped to replicate. And we have had so many conversations with landlords, with renters, with people who have really dug in, and the detailed feedback that we received helped us get to this ordinance today. So thank you to CPED and Reg Services and the coordinator's office and all of the staff who helped us get here. And I think more than any other ordinance I've worked on, our two policy aides in our two offices did, I don't think we would have this ordinance in front of us if not for their efforts. They really went above and beyond, and it has been wearing on, I think, all of us as we try to do all of the other things as well. So I'll also say more on Friday, but wanted to thank Councilmember Ellison in particular.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 amendments that I'd like to move forward, and I'll note that I have met with the authors, and the authors are in agreement with these amendments. They've been sent to you electronically, and I'll just read them out loud today. As you can tell, I'm not feeling that well, so I was happy to be able to attend the entire meeting, and I just want to not get into a great discussion, but bring these forward. I'm moving to amend section 244.1910 of the ordinance to add the language, in addition to any other remedy available at equity or law, including but not limited to escalating administrative fines. I'm trying to do this because, quite frankly, because of the Steve Friend situation, where we have we penalize a landlord who doesn't do the right thing, and then we revoke their license or move to revoke their license, putting tenants in danger. And I'd like to see a situation where we have the option to have large escalating fines, potentially concurrent with revocation, but definitely potentially in lieu of. We have not had the ability to do something for the tenants in this situation, and revoking the license just puts them in danger, and I'm worried about that. So I want our staff to have the option to move administrative fines as well.
So I'll consider that a motion, and maybe we can vote on that. Is there any discussion on it? Seeing none, then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That amendment is passed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second amendment is amending section 244.2030I of the ordinance to read, and this is a new section. This section will become effective June 1st, 2020. Prior to the effective date, the city will convene a cross-sector implementation committee to create and execute an implementation plan. The committee will include representatives from the legal and tenant advocacy organizations, multifamily housing industry, and city departments. The committee will determine best practices and policies for ordinance implementation, including the creation of relevant screening templates for legal screening options, including the individualized assessment, and create an outreach and engagement plan. The reason I'm bringing this forward is because in my work on advance notice, it became clear that smaller landlords didn't know how to put up a notice. And now we provide the notice for them that they can just put up on their own, creating less of a barrier for landlords to be able to do this work. And when I hear the small landlords talk about how this could be difficult for them, I think it would be easier if we provided a template for individualized, for legal screening options and or individualized assessments.
All right, is there any discussion on that? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say that a lot of this work has already begun with our staff team, and I think it's just fine to put it in writing in this way, reflects the intentions of the authors of the ordinance and the staff who've been working on it.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. And then that passes, and we'll move on to the third amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also moving to amend section 244.2030 by adding the language, the city will continue to monitor and improve the ordinance based on new information, including tenant and property owner experiences, research, and market conditions as it becomes available. The reason I'm bringing this forward is because I serve on the Family Housing Fund Board, and we are in the middle of a study, and there could be additional information that could be brought forward to further improve this ordinance, and I want to be open to monitoring and improving it as time goes on.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. That amendment then is approved, and so now I think that we have an amended ordinance before us. Are there any comments or any other amendments or changes? Councilmember Ellison.
I'll say briefly before we go. I think that it was a lot of folks mentioned, what's the intention of this ordinance? And I think the intention of this ordinance is about creating a certain level of access into the housing market where people currently lack it. People mentioned things that this ordinance will not do, right? This ordinance does not build housing, right? But the city certainly has a lot of initiatives that seek that end, and I think that we've been exhaustive and will continue to be in figuring out what are the incentives that will support the creation of more affordable housing. And so, yes, not every ordinance does every single thing, but building our way out of an affordable housing crisis is not the way that we can go either, right? We can build and build and build, and people with blemishes on their record will continue to be screened out of our city if we don't make this change. And so I think it was mentioned that these ordinances need to work within an ecosystem of housing initiatives that we're doing, and I think that they do. Right. I think that advance notice is a policy that was spearheaded by Councilmember Goodman and Councilmember Schrader. This sort of folds within that work. We added more money to the budget for tenants to be represented in housing court last year. I think that this folds into that work. And I think that it's important that we ask ourselves, what is our current standard built on? And at what point is somebody no longer a risk? This ordinance seeks to answer that question. And so it's not the intention for folks to take on more risk. It's to say at what point is somebody no longer a risk, and should we stop excluding them from the mainstream housing market? And so, yes, so this ordinance will not solve every single problem, and I don't think it was ever intended to, but I think that it works within an ecosystem of housing efforts that we're doing here at the city that I think will go a long way in supporting our constituents. So I want to thank my committee members, and we are going to take a look at this feedback. I think many folks have made a lot of good points. I appreciate Councilmember Goodman for her amendments, and we look forward to taking all the comments today and then moving this to the full council meeting. So thank you.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just echoing something Councilmember Ellison just said, that we expected, based on the conversations we've had up until today, there to be a lot of public testimony and a lot of ideas coming forward. To the extent that there could be changes to the ordinance, I think we'll have some time between now and the council meeting in a few weeks to look at those, incorporate them. It's our commitment, I think, to be as transparent about anything that would be coming to the council meeting as possible with our colleagues in the public. So make that commitment clear. And again, just want to thank everyone who took the time to be here today. And I've been reflecting for much of this time on one of the comments that said the woman who said, why do we have to keep coming and why do we have to keep working so hard? And I want you to know that it matters that you came here today. I know that you've been to a lot of meetings, and I know this is a fraction of what you asked us to do and expect of us, and we hear you. I also don't know why everything takes so long. I mean, but we're working on that too. And I mean, the real answer to that, in all seriousness, is that there are so many structural barriers to change. And we take for granted that the status quo, so I think the system takes for granted that the status quo is okay and is working, and we all know that it isn't. The status quo isn't working. And so the risk of doing nothing is often more than the risks that we hear about from change. And I think that's an important value that we have to continue to state, because our community is in crisis. People are asking me, my constituents, how come so many more people are living on the Greenway or in storefronts in Uptown? It's because more people are experiencing homelessness. And if we don't do these simple things that are in our control that we can do now, that problem is just going to grow worse and worse over time. So thank you for everything the community has done. These ideas came from the community. And I also appreciate my ward's 80% rental housing. We have so many small landlords, passionate folks who live in the community, who care about their tenants, who talked with me, talked with Councilmember Ellison. A lot of your feedback was incorporated from the very beginning, and we appreciate all the time that you have all taken too.
Thank you very much. So seeing no other comments, then I'll call the vote on the ordinance as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that carries. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone goes down with a bumper.
I know.